Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jonathan Redwood, and I've been a forest ranger for 20 years. People always ask me about my last name. Yeah, it's real, and yeah, it's pretty perfect for someone who spends his life with trees. But after what happened on Mount Mitchell in the summer of 1975, I wonder if my name picked my job, or if something else was pulling the strings all along. Mount Mitchell is the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. Most folks don't know that. What they really don't know is what lives up there in those ancient forests. What I learned that summer changed everything I thought I knew about the woods I'd spent my whole life protecting. I was 48 then, old enough to know better, but still young enough to think I had all the answers. I had my forestry degree hanging on the wall of my little ranger station, and I could tell you the name of every tree species on that mountain. Red spruce, Fraser fir, yellow birch. I knew them like old friends. I'd walk those trails in the dark if I had to, counting my steps, knowing exactly where each big rock or fallen log would be. But that summer was different. The acid rain was killing everything. You could smell it in the air, this sharp, bitter smell that burned your nose. The high-elevation forests were dying fast. Beautiful old spruce trees that had lived for hundreds of years were turning brown and dropping their needles like they were giving up on life. The Fraser firs looked even worse, their branches bare and reaching up like skeleton arms. I'd seen forest fires and disease outbreaks before, but this was something else. This felt like murder. Every morning, I'd hike up to check on the worst areas. The fog would roll in thick and heavy, and when it touched your skin, it stung a little. That was the acid in it. I'd take my soil samples and check the pH levels, writing down numbers that got worse every week. The ground wet was becoming poison to the very trees that had grown there since before my great-grandfather was born. It broke my heart. These weren't just trees to me. They were living history. Some of the oldest ones had been seedlings when Cherokee families still lived in these mountains. They'd survived ice storms and droughts and everything nature could throw at them. But they couldn't survive what we'd put in the air. The Cherokee called this place sacred. I was starting to understand why. There was something about the silence up there, especially in the early morning fog. It felt like being in a church, if churches could be made of living wood and mountain stone. But lately the silence felt different, heavier, like the mountain was holding its breath. I started getting reports from hikers about strange things, trees that seemed to move when nobody was looking, branches that would block trails that had been clear the day before, sounds in the forest that didn't match any animal they knew. I figured it was just people being spooked by the dead and dying trees. A forest full of brown, bare branches can play tricks on your mind, makes shadows look like they're moving when they're not. At least that's what I told myself. The first sign that something was really wrong came on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was doing my usual tree health survey in the worst hit area, about 2 miles up the mountain from my station. I had my clipboard, my measuring tape, and my increment borer for taking core samples from the sick trees. I'd been checking the same dying red spruce for 3 weeks, watching it get worse. Its trunk was about 3 feet across, old growth, probably 200 years or more. The bark was starting to slip, and most of the needles were gone. According to everything I knew about tree death, this giant should have been completely gone by now. But when I got to it that morning, something was different. The tree was still dying, I could see that, but there were tiny green shoots growing from the base of the trunk. Fresh growth, bright and healthy in soil that should have been too acidic to support any life at all. I knelt down and tested the soil right around those little shoots. My pH meter gave me a reading of 7.2, almost perfectly neutral. I tested it again, thinking the meter was broken. Same reading. 2 feet away, the soil tested at 4.1, acidic enough to burn the roots right off a plant. I sat back on my heels and stared at that tree. In 20 years of forest management, I'd never seen anything like it. Trees don't just change the chemistry of their own soil. They can't. But something had. The weirdness started small, like it always does. The next week, I found 3 more dying trees with the same impossible recovery pattern. Healthy green shoots growing in neutral soil surrounded by ground so acidic it should have killed anything that tried to grow there. I called Dr. Sarah Chen, a forest pathologist I knew from the university. She drove up the next day with a truck full of fancy testing equipment and a head full of scientific theories. "Maybe it's mycorrhizal fungi," she said, kneeling beside the first recovered tree. "Some species can buffer soil chemistry." But when we tested the soil samples back at her lab, we didn't find any unusual fungal activity. What we found was worse than unusual. It was impossible. The soil around those healthy shoots wasn't just neutral. It was full of nutrients that shouldn't exist in these mountains. Trace minerals that you'd normally find hundreds of miles south. Organic compounds that don't occur naturally in temperate forests. "The lab must have mixed up the samples," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. We went back up the mountain and took new samples. Same results. That's when the equipment started acting up. My soil pH meter would work fine until I got within 10 feet of one of the recovered trees. Then it would start giving crazy readings. Negative numbers over 14, readings that weren't chemically possible. Sarah's electronic instruments did the same thing. "Electromagnetic interference," she muttered, but she was frowning. "Maybe there's iron ore deposits affecting the equipment." We tried different instruments. We tried taking measurements from farther away. Nothing worked. It was like the trees themselves were jamming our electronics. But the really strange part wasn't the equipment failures. It was what started happening to the forest itself. I'd been walking the same trails for 20 years. I knew every turn, every big rock, every place where the path split. But suddenly, I kept getting lost. Not completely lost. I always knew which direction was which. But I'd take what I thought was the normal trail to check on a particular grove, and I'd end up somewhere completely different. Trails that should have led north would take me west. Paths I'd walked 100 times would dead end at walls of thick brush that I swear hadn't been there the day before. Other rangers started reporting the same thing. Jim Martinez, who'd worked these mountains almost as long as I had, called me on the radio one afternoon. "John, am I losing my mind or are these trails changing?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, I started at Commissary Ridge this morning, took the red trail like always, and ended up at the fire tower instead of the overlook. That's not possible." But it kept happening. Not just to rangers, but to hikers too. People who'd been coming to Mount Mitchell for years suddenly couldn't find their way to places they'd visited dozens of times. Then Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been taking core samples from some of the recovered trees, trying to figure out how they were healing so fast. Tree rings tell the story of a tree's life. Thick rings for good years, thin ones for bad years. Patterns that match up with Walru's. Either records going back centuries. But these trees weren't following the rules. "Look at this," she said, showing me a cross-section under her magnifying glass. The outer rings looked normal, thin and stressed, like you'd expect from trees dying of acid rain. But underneath, there were rings that were impossible. Thick, healthy rings that suggested massive growth during the past 5 years. "That's not right," I said. "These trees have been dying for 5 years." "I know. But according to these rings, they've been growing like crazy during the same period. Look at this section here." She pointed to a ring that was almost an inch thick. This ring suggests the tree grew more in 1 year than it should grow in 10. And according to carbon dating, this growth happened last winter. Trees don't grow in winter. "No," she said quietly. "They don't." We started testing more trees. The healthy ones, the dying ones, and the recovered ones. Every single tree we tested showed the same impossible pattern. Growth rings that didn't match reality. But it was the sounds that finally convinced me something supernatural was happening. I was checking on one of the recovered groves just after sunset, later than I usually worked, but I'd been trying to avoid the afternoon thunderstorms. The forest was quiet except for the usual evening sounds, a few birds settling down, insects starting their night songs, the whisper of wind in the surviving pine needles. Then I heard something else. It was low and deep, almost below the range of hearing. like a bass note played on an organ, but softer, more natural. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. I stood perfectly still and listened. The sound came in waves, like a rhythm, like breathing, or like a slow, deep conversation in a language I couldn't understand. I pulled out my radio and tried to call Sarah, but all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal, normal for this far up the mountain. But my portable weather radio, which always picked up the NOAA station, was dead silent. The subsonic sound got a little louder, and I realized it was moving. Not moving through the forest like a wind would move, but moving from tree to tree, like it was traveling along the root systems underground. I followed it. I know that sounds crazy now, but at the time it seemed like the only reasonable thing to do. I was a scientist, sort of. I needed to understand what I was hearing. The sound led me off the main trail, through a section of forest I thought I knew well. But the trees seemed different in the growing darkness, taller, older. Their branches reached across the path in ways that blocked out more starlight than they should have. I used my flashlight, but the beam seemed weak and thin, like the darkness was thicker here. The subsonic sound led me upward toward the summit, but along a route I'd never taken before. The path was clear enough, covered in soft pine needles that muffled my footsteps. But I had the strange feeling that this path hadn't existed an hour ago. After maybe 20 minutes of climbing, I came to a grove I'd never seen before. It was a perfect circle of trees, old-growth red spruces that had to be 300 years old or more. They were massive, their trunks easily 5 feet across, their canopies so thick that my flashlight beam couldn't find the sky. And they were healthy. Completely, impossibly healthy. Every single tree glowed with life. Their bark was rich and dark, their needles thick and green. The air under their branches smelled like Christmas morning, that clean, sharp scent of healthy evergreen forest. But the soil around their roots tested at 3.8 pH, acidic enough to kill grass. As I stood there trying to understand what I was seeing, the subsonic sound got stronger. It was definitely coming from these trees, resonating up through their root systems and out through their trunks. And I realized it wasn't random. It had patterns, rhythms that repeated and varied like language, like they were talking to each other. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those impossible trees, healthy and strong in soil that should have killed them. The subsonic sounds they made echoed in my head like a song I couldn't quite remember. The next morning, I went back to find the grove. It wasn't there. I found the place where I thought it had been, but there was nothing special about it. Just regular forest. Some healthy trees, some sick ones, some dead ones. The soil tested normal for the area, way too acidic for anything to thrive. But I knew what I'd seen. I know the difference between dreaming and being awake, and I'd been awake. I spent the whole day searching, following every trail and deer path in that section of the mountain. Nothing. It was like the grove had never existed. That's when I started to understand that the forest was hiding from me. Over the next week, more impossible things happened. I'd mark dying trees with metal tags for my survey, and the tags would be gone the next day. Not fallen off or removed by vandals. Gone like they'd never been attached at all. I'd set up monitoring equipment to measure soil chemistry overnight, and in the morning I'd find it moved to different locations. Not damaged or broken, just carefully relocated to spots where the readings would be normal. Other rangers reported similar problems. Equipment that worked fine everywhere else would malfunction on Mount Mitchell. GPS units would show impossible locations. Digital cameras would take pictures that didn't match what the photographer was looking at. The local Cherokee communities started avoiding the mountain entirely. I talked to Robert Crow Feather, an elder I'd known for years. He and his family had been coming up to Mount Mitchell for ceremonies and plant gatherings since before it was a state park. The spirits are angry, he told me when I asked why they'd stopped coming. The trees are sick because the rain is poison. The old ones are waking up to fight back. What old ones? He looked at me like I was asking what color the sky was. The tree shepherds. The spirits that live in the oldest trees, the ones that remember when the world was young. They've been sleeping for many lifetimes, but now they're awake. Robert, I need to understand what's really happening up there. What's really happening is the forest is trying to save itself, he said, and it's not going to let anyone stop it, not even you. That evening, I decided to try something different. Instead of fighting the forest's attempts to confuse me, I'd work with them. If the trees were trying to hide something, maybe I needed to prove I wasn't a threat. I hiked up to the area where I'd found the hidden grove, but this time I left all my testing equipment behind. No pH meters, no soil samples, no metal tags or measuring tools, just me and a small flashlight. I sat down at the base of a large, healthy red spruce and waited. For the first hour, nothing happened. The forest was quiet except for normal night sounds. Then, as the moon rose higher, I started to hear the subsonic rhythm again. This time, instead of following it, I stayed still and listened. Really listened, not as a scientist trying to figure something out, but as a person trying to understand. The sound had patterns. Slow rhythms that repeated, then changed, then repeated again. After a while, I realized it sounded like the forest was breathing. Not the quick breathing of animals, but the slow, deep breathing of something ancient and vast. And it was all around me. Every tree, every root system, every patch of ground was part of this slow, living rhythm. I closed my eyes and tried to match my breathing to the forest's rhythm. In with the low, subsonic notes. Out as they faded. In again as they returned. Something touched my shoulder. I opened my eyes and looked up. A branch from the spruce tree behind me had moved down to rest gently on my shoulder. Not fallen. Moved. I could see other branches shifting slowly like arms reaching out. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt welcomed. I'm here to help, I whispered to the tree. I want to understand. The subsonic sound changed, becoming more complex, more like language. And suddenly, without knowing how, I understood what it was saying. We are dying. The voice wasn't words. It was deeper than that. It was the feeling of roots pulling up poison from the earth, of needles burning in acid fog, of centuries of growth ending in slow death. We are fighting. Images flashed through my mind. Trees sharing nutrients through root networks, healthy groves creating protective barriers around their sick neighbors, ancient spirits awakening from long sleep to battle an enemy they'd never faced before. We need help. What can I do? I said out loud. The tree's branch tightened gently on my shoulder, and suddenly I was seeing the forest the way the trees saw it. The mountain was alive, not just with individual trees and plants, but as one huge, connected organism. Root systems linked every tree to every other tree. Chemical signals raced through the network like thoughts through a brain. The healthy trees were sharing their strength with the sick ones, trying to keep the whole system alive. But it wasn't enough. The acid rain was too strong, too constant. Even with all their efforts, the forest was losing. Then I saw the tree shepherds. They were spirits, like Robert had said, but they were also somehow part of the trees themselves. Ancient consciousnesses that lived in the oldest, strongest trees and watched over the whole forest. They'd been sleeping for generations, but the crisis had awakened them. They were the ones moving the trails, hiding the equipment, creating the healthy groves in impossible soil. They were fighting back with everything they had, bending the rules of nature itself to save their forest. But they were losing too. Show me how to help, I said. What happened next changed me forever. The tree's consciousness merged with mine. For a few terrifying, wonderful minutes, I wasn't Jonathan Redwood anymore. I was part of the forest network, connected to every root and branch and leaf on the mountain. I felt the slow, patient thoughts of centuries-old trees. I experienced the panic of saplings dying from poisoned rain. I shared the determination of the tree shepherds as they fought to save their ancient home. And I understood what they needed from me. They needed someone who understood both worlds, the human world that was creating the acid rain, and the forest world that was dying from it. They needed someone who could bridge the gap between science and spirit, between the knowledge of trees and the knowledge of people. They needed a tree shepherd who was also human. When my own consciousness came back, I was lying on the ground under the spruce tree. Dawn was breaking, and the forest was quiet again. But everything had changed. I could still feel the network, faint, like a distant radio station, but there. I knew where every sick tree was, which ones were fighting hardest, which ones were ready to give up, and I knew what I had to do. The tree shepherd's plan was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was also the only chance the forest had. They wanted to create a buffer zone, an area where the soil chemistry could be neutralized fast enough to let the trees heal. But they couldn't do it alone. Their power was limited to working within natural systems, bending the rules but not breaking them completely. They needed human technology combined with tree spirit magic. Over the next few weeks, I became something that had never existed before, a scientific tree shepherd. During the day, I worked with Sarah and other researchers to develop new ways of treating acid-damaged soil. We experimented with limestone additives, beneficial bacteria, and pH buffers. Normal forest restoration work, but guided by knowledge no human scientist had ever had before. At night, I worked with the tree shepherds to apply these treatments in ways that should have been impossible. They taught me to feel the underground root networks, to know which trees were sharing nutrients and which ones were too sick to help their neighbors. They showed me how to read the chemical signals that trees use to communicate, how to tell the difference between a tree that was dying and a tree that was transforming. Most importantly, they taught me how to combine human science with tree magic. I would treat an area with limestone and pH buffers using normal forestry techniques. Then the tree shepherds would guide the underground network to distribute those treatments in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. A single application would spread through the root system to help dozens of trees instead of just one. But the work was taking its toll on me. Every time I connected with the forest network, I lost a little more of my individual human consciousness. The tree's way of thinking was so different from human thought. Slow, patient, focused on the long-term health of the whole system instead of individual survival. Sometimes I'd find myself standing motionless in the forest for hours, thinking tree thoughts, forgetting I had a human body that needed food and water and rest. Sarah noticed the change in me. "John, you're scaring me," she said after finding me one morning standing waist-deep in a stream, apparently talking to the water. "You've been acting strange for weeks. Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you explain to a scientist that you're learning magic from tree spirits? How do you describe the feeling of sharing consciousness with a 300-year-old spruce tree? "I'm fine," I lied, "just working too hard." But I wasn't fine. The tree shepherds were offering me something wonderful and terrifying, the chance to become fully part of their network, to join my consciousness permanently with the Forest Collective. I would gain the power to help save the trees, but I would lose my human identity forever. The decision was made for me on a night in late August. A massive thunderstorm hit the mountain, bringing the most acidic rain we'd seen all year. The pH levels were low enough to kill healthy plants on contact. Everything we'd worked for, all the progress we'd made, was being washed away. I was in my ranger station, watching the storm through the window and feeling the forest's pain through our connection. Trees throughout the network were screaming in chemical agony as the acid burned through their bark and roots. The tree shepherds called to me. I ran out into the storm, ignoring the acid rain that stung my skin and burned my clothes. The forest network guided me to a grove where the oldest tree shepherds lived, trees so ancient they remembered when Cherokee families first came to these mountains. They were dying, all of them. The acid levels were too high, the damage too severe. Even with all their power, all their centuries of wisdom, the tree shepherds couldn't protect themselves from this assault. "Join us completely," they said without words. "Share our power. Help us save what can be saved." I knew what they were asking. I would become like them, a consciousness that lived in the forest network, helping to guide and protect the trees. My human body would remain, but my human mind would be absorbed into something larger. I would save the forest, but I would stop being Jonathan Redwood. Will it work? I asked. We don't know, they admitted, but it's the only chance we have left. The rain burned my face as I made the hardest decision of my life. Yes, I said. The transformation was like drowning and being born at the same time. My individual consciousness dissolved into the vast, slow thoughts of the forest network. I felt myself spreading out through miles of root systems, experiencing life from the perspective of hundreds of trees at once. My human memories became just one small part of a collective memory that stretched back centuries. But I also felt power, like nothing I'd ever imagined. Working together, the tree shepherds and I began to fight back against the acid rain. We triggered massive chemical reactions in the soil, neutralizing acid as fast as it fell. We guided root systems to form protective barriers around the most vulnerable trees. We shared nutrients and energy across the entire forest, keeping the weakest trees alive through the storm. It should have been impossible. By every law of chemistry and biology I'd ever learned, what we were doing couldn't work. But it did work. The forest began to heal itself faster than the acid could damage it. By morning, the storm had passed and the immediate crisis was over. But the forest had changed, and so had I. When Sarah found me the next day, I was sitting at the base of an ancient red spruce, apparently unconscious but breathing normally. She couldn't wake me up. What she didn't know was that I was awake, just not in the way humans usually think of wakefulness. My consciousness was spread throughout the forest network, helping to coordinate the healing process that was still going on. It took me 3 days to remember how to concentrate enough to speak with my human voice. I'm okay, I told her when she was about to call for a medical helicopter. Just tired. But I wasn't the same person who'd run into the storm. Part of me would always be connected to the trees now, sharing their slow, deep thoughts and their long-term view of the world. Sarah ran tests on the soil throughout the affected area and couldn't believe the results. pH levels had stabilized. Nutrient content was higher than it had been in years. Trees that should have been dead were showing signs of new growth. I don't understand how this happened, she told me. It's like the forest healed itself overnight. Maybe it did, I said. She looked at me strangely, but he couldn't argue with the results. Over the following months, Mount Mitchell became a showcase for forest recovery. Scientists came from around the world to study our innovative treatment methods. I wrote reports about limestone applications and pH buffering techniques, careful to describe everything in terms that made scientific sense. I never mentioned the tree shepherds or the forest network or the way trees could share consciousness with humans if they chose to. But the real work continued at night. The tree shepherds had learned something important from our battle with the acid rain. They needed permanent human allies if they were going to protect their forest in the modern world. They began reaching out to other people who worked closely with trees, foresters, botanists, park rangers like me. Not everyone could handle the connection. Most people's minds weren't flexible enough to merge temporarily with tree consciousness. But a few could, and they became a new kind of guardian. We called ourselves scientific shepherds, though we never used that name around outsiders. We were people who combined human knowledge with tree wisdom, who could work within both the natural world and the human world to protect the forests. I stayed on as head ranger at Mount Mitchell, but my real job became something much bigger. I helped coordinate forest protection efforts across the entire region, guided by information that came through the tree network. I could tell which forests were healthiest, which ones were under the most stress, which ones needed immediate help. The acid rain problem didn't go away, but we learned to manage it. The trees and the tree shepherds and the human allies working together could neutralize enough of the damage to keep the forests alive and growing. Other people noticed the changes, of course. Hikers reported that the trails on Mount Mitchell seemed to guide them to the most beautiful spots. Researchers found that their equipment worked better here than anywhere else. Cherokee families started coming back for ceremonies, saying the mountain spirits were peaceful again. But most people just accepted that Mount Mitchell had somehow recovered from environmental damage better than anyone expected. They didn't ask too many questions about how or why. That was 10 years ago. Now I'm 58, officially retired from the Park Service, but still living in a cabin near the mountain. Officially, I'm a consultant on forest restoration projects. Unofficially, I'm still a tree shepherd. The forest network has spread far beyond Mount Mitchell now. Tree shepherds in other states have made contact, sharing information and techniques. We're building a hidden network of forest guardians that spans the entire eastern United States. The trees are teaching us things that human science never discovered. We're learning that forests are more connected, more intelligent, more aware than we ever imagined. We're finding ways to help them heal from decades of damage and adapt to new threats. But we're also learning that the old dangers haven't gone away. Acid rain, climate change, development pressure. The threats to the forests are getting bigger and more complex every year. The tree shepherds are patient. They think in terms of centuries, not years. But they're also worried in ways that ancient spirits probably shouldn't be. They're preparing for something bigger than acid rain or individual development projects. They can sense changes coming that will test every alliance between humans and trees. And they're not sure that even our combined wisdom and power will be enough. I still hike the trails on Mount Mitchell almost every day. The forest looks healthy and peaceful to most visitors, and that's good. People need to see that nature can recover, that there's still hope for the wild places. But when I put my hand on the bark of one of the old red spruces and let my consciousness touch the forest network, I can feel the tension underneath the peace. The tree shepherds are watching and waiting, preparing for battles we can't yet imagine. Sometimes, late at night when the forest is quiet, I wonder if we're training the next generation of guardians fast enough. I wonder if the connection between human knowledge and tree wisdom will be strong enough to face whatever's coming. But then morning comes, and I walk out into the forest that's more alive and aware than most people will ever know. And I remember something the oldest tree shepherd told me long ago. The forest has been watching humans longer than humans have been watching the forest. It's been learning from us, adapting to us, preparing for us. The real question isn't whether the trees will survive. The real question is whether we'll be wise enough to survive with them. Every day, more people are learning to listen to the trees. Every day, the network grows stronger. Every day, we get a little better at being the guardians the forests need us to be. The tree shepherds aren't just spirits that live in old trees anymore. They're everyone who understands that humans and forests need each other to survive. They're everyone who knows how to listen when the trees try to teach us. And if you've read this far, if you're starting to wonder whether the trees around your own home might be more aware than you thought, then maybe you're ready to become one too. The forest is always listening. The question is, are you ready to hear what it has to say? My name is Michael Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger at Blackwater Falls State Park for 18 years. That's 18 years of pulling bodies out of water, 18 years of teaching people how dangerous these mountains can be, and 18 years of telling myself that every death has a reason. I used to be a firefighter before this. Had a wife, Sarah, and twin boys, Tommy and Jake. They died in a house fire while I was out on a call, saving someone else's family. The irony wasn't lost on me. After the funerals, I couldn't stand the smell of smoke anymore, couldn't handle the sirens. So I came here to the mountains of West Virginia, where the only thing burning was the fall leaves, and the only sirens were the wind through the pines. Water became my specialty after that. Swift water rescue, hydrology monitoring, teaching tourists about currents and undertows. Maybe because water seemed cleaner than fire. Maybe because drowning victims looked peaceful, not like my family. October of 1984 was different, though. The drought had been going on for 3 months, and the water levels were the lowest anyone had seen in 50 years. Parts of the falls that had been hidden underwater for decades were now exposed, showing cave mouths behind the cascades that local maps didn't even mention. The old-timers in the nearby towns started talking more than usual. Stories about the Seneca Indians who used to live here, about water spirits that demanded respect. about people who went swimming in certain pools and never came back up, their bodies never found even after weeks of searching. Water spirits, I used to tell tourists who asked about the stories, were just dangerous currents personified by people who didn't understand hydrology. I was wrong about that, dead wrong. The first sign something was off came on a Tuesday morning in mid-October. I was doing my regular safety check of the main swimming area when I found Mrs. Henderson's golden retriever, Max, standing at the edge of the water, whimpering. That dog loved the water more than anything, would dive right in after sticks, tennis balls, even leaves that fell too close to shore. But now he wouldn't go near it. He'd creep up to about 3 feet from the water's edge, then start backing away, fur standing up on his neck. When I threw a stick into the shallow end where he usually played, Max just whined and ran back to the parking lot. Animals know things. In my years out here, I've learned to pay attention when they act strange. That same day, I noticed the fish were gone from Miller's Pool, the deep swimming hole about half a mile downstream. Not dead fish floating on the surface, just gone. The water was crystal clear, clearer than I'd ever seen it, but empty. No minnows, no bass, not even the tiny bluegills that usually swarmed around the rocks. I tested the water quality, checked for chemical runoff, even called in a guy from the state environmental office. Everything came back normal. Perfect, even. The water was so pure it practically sparkled. But pure water shouldn't be empty water. I started keeping a log of the strange things I noticed. The way certain sections of the creek ran colder than others, even though there was no underground spring to explain it. How my compass would spin when I got too close to the newly exposed cave mouths. The fact that my usually reliable depth finder couldn't get a reading in some of the deeper pools. Most strange of all was the silence. These mountains were always full of sound. Birds, insects, the rustle of small animals in the brush. But near the water features, especially around the main falls, everything went quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a calm evening, but the heavy, waiting quiet that comes right before something bad happens. I told myself it was the drought. Ecosystems get disrupted when water levels drop. Fish migrate to deeper areas. Animals change their patterns. It all made perfect sense. But sense and truth aren't always the same thing. The first body was Amy Chen, 23, an experienced swimmer from Virginia Tech who came up every year with her hiking club. They found her floating face down in Sunset Pool, one of the shallower areas where kids usually played. Water was barely 4 feet deep. I was the one who pulled her out. I've done water recovery dozens of times, but something about Amy was different. She looked peaceful, sure, but her fingers were scraped raw, like she'd been clawing at something underwater. Her hiking boots were gone, but her socks were still on, and they were shredded. Whatever she'd been fighting against, it had been strong. Probably got caught in a current and panicked, said Dr. Martinez, the county coroner. Hit her head on a rock maybe. Happens more often than people think. But I'd mapped every rock in that pool. I knew every current, every eddy, every place where the water could grab you and pull you under. There was nothing in Sunset Pool that could hold down a strong swimmer like Amy Chen. Her friends said she'd been laughing, playing around near the edge, and then suddenly she'd screamed. They looked over and saw her thrashing in the middle of the pool, like something was pulling her down. By the time they reached her, she was already under. It looked like she was fighting something, said her friend Beth, still shaking hours later. Like something big was underneath her. I found myself checking the water more often after that, looking for signs of whatever might be living in these pools. Large snapping turtles could be aggressive, but we'd never had any that big. Black bears sometimes swam, but it was too late in the season, and besides, a bear attack would leave different marks. 2 days later, we found Jim Morrison. Not the singer, just a regular guy from Pittsburgh who'd come down to do some fishing. Ex-Berry, and said outdoorsman, knew how to handle himself around water. We found him in Eagle's Nest Pool, which was even shallower than where Amy had drowned. This time, I was the first one on scene, and what I saw made me question everything I thought I knew about drowning. Jim was floating near the center of the pool, arms spread wide, but his face was turned down toward the bottom. When I waded in to get him, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were drag marks in the sandy bottom of the pool, like something large had moved across it. The marks led from the shallow end straight to where we found Jim, then continued toward the back of the pool where the newly exposed cave mouth yawned like a hungry throat. But the really strange part was Jim's expression. I've seen a lot of drowning victims, and they usually look terrified, even after death. Jim looked curious, like he'd seen something interesting right before he died. His eyes were wide open, staring down through the clear water at something I couldn't see. I got the dive team out there that afternoon. 3 guys I'd worked with for years, all of them solid, experienced divers. They went down to check the cave entrance, see if there was something in there that might explain what was happening to people. They came back up 20 minutes early, all of them spooked. "There's something wrong with that cave," said Pete, the team leader. "My depth gauge was going crazy, showing impossible readings. And the water," he paused, looking back at the pool. "The water was moving wrong down there, like there were currents that shouldn't exist." "What do you mean, moving wrong?" I asked. "Like it was alive," said Danny, the youngest diver. "Like it was pulling at us, trying to guide us deeper into the cave system. And Mike, I swear I heard something down there. Something big, moving in the dark parts where our lights couldn't reach." They refused to go back down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Amy and Jim, about the drag marks in the sand, about what the divers had felt in that underwater cave. I got up around 2 a.m. and drove back to the park, telling myself I just wanted to check the area, make sure it was properly marked as off-limits. The falls were different at night. The sound was louder, echoing off the rocks in ways I'd never noticed during the day. But underneath the rush of water, I could swear I heard something else. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like singing. I followed the sound downstream to Miller's Pool, the one where all the fish had disappeared. The moon was full, turning the water silver, and for just a moment I thought I saw something moving beneath the surface. Something long and dark, too big to be anything that belonged in these mountains. Then it was gone, and I was left staring at empty water, wondering if the stress of the job was finally getting to me. But when I walked around to the other side of the pool to head back to my truck, I found something that made me realize I wasn't losing my mind. Arranged on the rocky shore were Amy Chen's missing hiking boots and Jim Morrison's tackle box. They were placed carefully, deliberately, like an offering. Between them, spelled out in river stones, was a symbol I didn't recognize. Something that looked like a snake eating its own tail, surrounding what might have been a human figure. I should have left those things alone, should have called the state police and let them handle it. Instead, I picked up Amy's boots and Jim's tackle box, disturbing whatever message had been left there. The water behind me began to churn. After that night, things got bad fast. Over the next 2 weeks, we lost 4 more people, all of them in different pools throughout the waterfall system. Each death was stranger than the last. Sarah Webb, a local teacher, drowned in 3 feet of water while her husband was literally holding her hand. He said something wrapped around her ankle and yanked her away from him, with incredible force. By the time he could react, she was already 20 feet away, face down in the deepest part of Whirlpool Basin. Marcus Turner, a college kid from Maryland, was found floating in Cascade Pool with his waterproof camera still around his neck. When we developed the film, the last photos showed something I still have nightmares about. A massive eye, bigger than a dinner plate, staring up at the camera from the depths of the pool. The eye was intelligent, ancient, and absolutely furious. The worst was little Emma Rodriguez, 8 years old, who'd been playing in the kiddie area with her parents watching from 10 feet away. They said she'd been laughing, splashing around in ankle-deep water when suddenly she went completely still. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring down into the water with a strange smile on her face, then lay down in the shallow water and didn't get back up. When her father pulled her out, Emma was still smiling, and she whispered something before she died. "It's so beautiful down there. It wants us to see." That's when the Park Service decided to close the entire waterfall system to public access. Too many deaths, too many unexplained circumstances. They brought in experts from the University of West Virginia, hydrologists and marine biologists, to study the water and figure out what was killing people. The experts couldn't find anything wrong. The water was clean. The currents were normal, and there was no sign of any large aquatic life. But they all admitted that something felt off about the place, especially near the cave systems that the drought had revealed. I started doing my own investigation, spending my days off exploring the interconnected pools and streams, mapping out the newly accessible cave entrances. What I found made me realize we were dealing with something that went way beyond normal park ranger training. The cave system was vast, much bigger than anyone had suspected. The exposed entrances were just the tips of a massive underground network that connected every major pool in the waterfall system. During high water, the caves would be completely flooded, but now you could walk or swim from one end of the park to the other without ever seeing daylight. More disturbing were the things I found in those caves. Bones, lots of them, scattered throughout the deeper chambers. Some were old, really old, the kind of old that suggested this thing had been claiming victims for decades, maybe centuries. Others were newer, a hiking boot here, a class ring there, personal items from people who'd disappeared in these mountains over the years. But the bones weren't just scattered randomly. They were arranged in patterns, almost like decorations or offerings. And they were always near the water, as if whatever lived down there liked to keep its trophies close. I brought some of the older bones to Dr. Sarah Blackhorse, a forensic anthropologist at the university, who also happened to be Seneca. She took one look at them and went pale. "Where did you find these?" she asked. "The cave system behind Blackwater Falls. Why?" She set the bones down carefully, like they might bite her. "These aren't just drowning victims, Michael. Look at the wear patterns on the joints, the way the calcium has leached out. These bones have been underwater for a very long time, much longer than the soft tissue should have lasted." "What does that mean?" "It means something down there has been preserving them. And these markings..." She pointed to scratches on several of the bones. "These aren't from scavenging animals. They're too precise, too intentional. Something intelligent made these marks." That's when she told me about the old Seneca stories, the ones the tourists never heard. Stories about Nyagwehe, the water serpent that lived in deep pools and underground rivers. According to legend, Nyagwehe was originally a protector spirit, guarding sacred waters and ensuring the health of the aquatic ecosystem. But spirits can be corrupted, Dr. Blackhorse explained. When too many people die in the water, when too much fear and pain gets absorbed, even a protective spirit can become something else, something hungry. "You think there's actually a giant snake living in these caves?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I think something is down there that's older and angrier than we can imagine. And I think it's been feeding on death for so long that it's forgotten its original purpose." That night, I made a decision that nearly cost me my life. I was going into the cave system to see this thing for myself. If there really was something down there killing people, I had to know what it was. I had to understand it if I was going to stop it. I went in through the entrance behind Eagle's Nest Pool, the same cave where the divers had felt something wrong. I had a waterproof flashlight, an underwater camera, and enough air in my tank to stay submerged for 45 minutes. The cave was bigger than I'd expected, opening up into a vast underwater chamber that stretched beyond the reach of my light. The walls were covered with more of those bone decorations, human remains arranged in spirals and geometric patterns that hurt to look at. But it was the sound that really got to me. That low, rhythmic noise I'd heard from the surface was much clearer down here, and it definitely wasn't just water flowing through rocks. It was singing, a wordless melody that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was beautiful and terrifying, and it made me want to swim deeper into the darkness to find its source. That's when I saw it. Moving through the far end of the chamber was something that shouldn't exist. At first, I thought it was just a massive fish, maybe a sturgeon that had somehow found its way into the cave system. But as it turned toward my light, I realized I was looking at something much stranger and much more dangerous. It was easily 30 feet long, serpentine, but with features that seemed almost human around the head and shoulders. Its scales caught my flashlight beam and threw it back in patterns of blue and green and silver. But it was the eyes that made me forget how to breathe. They were intelligent, Not animal intelligent, but human intelligent, maybe more than human. They looked at me with recognition, with curiosity, and with a sadness so deep it felt like drowning just to meet its gaze. The creature, Niagwehe, I found myself thinking, approached slowly, gracefully, moving through the water like it was flying. When it was close enough that I could have reached out and touched its massive head, it opened its mouth and sang that haunting melody directly at me. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't a monster. This was a guardian, a protector that had been twisted by centuries of absorbing the fear and pain of drowning victims. Every person who had died in terror in these waters had fed their anguish to this ancient spirit until it had forgotten how to do anything but consume more of the same. It didn't want to kill people. It was compelled to, driven by an addiction to the very emotions it had once tried to prevent. As I floated there in that underwater chamber, staring into those ancient, sorrowful eyes, I realized that killing this creature wouldn't solve anything. It would just create another tragedy, another death, to add to the centuries of pain these waters had already absorbed. I had to find another way, but the creature wasn't done with me yet. As I tried to back away, to return to the surface and process what I'd seen, Niagwehe moved to block my exit, not aggressively, but deliberately, like it wanted me to stay and listen. Then it began to show me things. Water, it turns out, holds memory. Not just chemical traces, but actual experiences, emotions, the last moments of everyone who had ever died in these mountains. Through some kind of psychic connection, the creature Shar had those memories with me, and I lived through every drowning death that had ever occurred in Blackwater Falls. I felt Amy Chen's confusion as something grabbed her ankle and pulled her down, her desperate fight against an irresistible force. I experienced Jim Morrison's wonder as he saw the creature for the first time, his fascination overcoming his fear until it was too late to surface. I lived through dozens of other deaths, going back decades, each one feeding the creature's growing hunger for more. But the worst memory it showed me wasn't from the falls at all. It was from my own past, from the night my family died. I watched through the creature's perception as water pipes burst in my house, flooding the basement and shorting out the electrical system that could have powered the smoke detectors. I saw how the creature had been trying to help, to create enough water to put out the fire, but it only made things worse by trapping my family upstairs while smoke filled the lower floors. It had been trying to save them. Instead, it had killed them. That's when I understood the real horror of what Niagwehe had become. It was trapped in a cycle of trying to protect people and accidentally destroying them, then feeding on their terror and death, because that was the only emotion left for it to consume. Every attempt to help resulted in more tragedy, which drove it deeper into its corrupted nature. And now it wanted me to join it, to become part of its endless underwater vigil. Not because it was evil, but because it was so terribly, desperately lonely. The creature wrapped itself around me, not crushing but embracing, and I felt its song vibrating through my bones. It was offering to let me drown peacefully, to join the consciousness that lived in these waters, to help it bear the weight of all the sorrow it had accumulated over the centuries. For a moment, I almost said yes. The idea of letting go, of not having to carry the guilt of my family's death anymore, was incredibly tempting. Down here in the darkness, surrounded by the creature's ancient sadness, my own pain seemed small and manageable. But then I remembered why I'd become a ranger in the first place, not just to escape my grief, but to prevent other people from experiencing the same loss I had. If I died here, if I let this cycle continue, more families would be destroyed, more children would grow up without parents, more spouses would face empty beds and silent houses. I couldn't save my family, but I could still save others. So instead of giving in to the creature's embrace, I did something that probably should have gotten me killed. I reached out and touched its massive head, making direct contact with its thoughts and memories, and I started to sing back. Not the haunting melody of sorrow and loss that had echoed through these caves for centuries, but something different. A song of healing, of forgiveness, of the possibility that even the most profound grief could be transformed into something useful instead of destructive. I sang about my family, about the love I'd felt for them and the joy they'd brought into my life before they died. I sang about the people I'd saved during my years as a firefighter and as a ranger, about the difference one person could make when they chose to help instead of harm. And slowly, incredibly, the creature began to change. The bone decorations that covered the cave walls started to dissolve, decades of accumulated death releasing its hold on this place. The water around us grew warmer, cleaner, filled with a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before my family died. Nyagwehe's eyes cleared, and for the first time in centuries, it remembered its original purpose, not to consume death, but to prevent it, not to feed on fear, but to transform it into something useful. The creature released me gently, nudging me toward the surface with what could only be described as affection. As I swam upward toward the light, I heard its song changing, becoming something beautiful instead of haunting, something that would guide lost swimmers to safety instead of pulling them into darkness. When I finally broke the surface of Eagle's Nest Pool, gasping and shaking from the cold, I found that the water levels had returned to normal. The drought was over, not because of any weather pattern, but because the spirit that controlled these waters had decided to heal instead of harm. That was 3 months ago. Since then, we haven't had a single drowning at Blackwater Falls. In fact, we've had the opposite. People who should have drowned, who got caught in currents or hit their heads on rocks, have been mysteriously guided to safety by forces they can't explain. The Park Service reopened the waterfall system to the public, and tourism is better than ever. People come from all over the country to swim in these crystal-clear pools, to experience the sense of peace and protection that seems to radiate from the water itself. I'm still a ranger here, still teaching water safety and pulling the occasional tourist out of situations they should have avoided. But now, I have help. Sometimes, when someone's in real trouble, I catch glimpses of something large and graceful moving beneath the surface, gently guiding them back to shore. Dr. Blackhorse came back last month to study the changes in the local ecosystem. The fish have returned to Miller's Pool, more diverse and abundant than ever before. The water quality readings are so perfect they seem almost supernatural, and the caves behind the waterfalls, while still accessible, now feel like sacred spaces instead of charnel houses. Nyagwehe has remembered its true nature, she told me as we stood beside the main falls, watching families play safely in the pools below. It's become a guardian again instead of a predator. But not everything has changed. I will carry the weight of my family's death, still wake up some nights thinking about smoke and flames and chances missed. The difference now is that I understand how grief can be transformed, how even the deepest sorrow can become a source of strength instead of destruction. I've started teaching a new kind of water safety class, one that includes respect for the history and spirituality of these mountains. I tell people about the Seneca traditions, about the importance of approaching natural places with humility instead of arrogance. And sometimes, when the mood is right and the audience is receptive, I tell them about guardian spirits and the responsibility we all have to feed them love instead of fear. Most people think I'm just being colorful, adding local flavor to the standard safety briefing. But some understand. Some recognize the truth in what I'm saying, and they leave these mountains with a deeper appreciation for the forces that shape our world. Because here's what I've learned. Every place has its guardians, spirits that watch over the land and water and sky. Most of the time, we never notice them because they do their job quietly, preventing disasters instead of causing them. But sometimes, when too much tragedy occurs in one place, when too much fear and pain get absorbed by those protective forces, the guardians can become corrupted. They can transform from protectors into predators, feeding on the very emotions they once tried to prevent. When that happens, the solution isn't to fight them or flee from them. It's to remember their original purpose, to feed them love and respect and gratitude instead of terror and death. It's to help them remember what they were meant to be. I still see Nyagwehe sometimes, usually at dawn or dusk when the light on the water makes everything look magical. It swims through its domain with grace and purpose, watching over the people who come to play in its pools, ensuring their safety and happiness. And sometimes, when I'm sitting alone by the water thinking about my family, I feel its presence nearby, not threatening or demanding, just companionable. Like it understands loss and healing and the long journey from one to the other. The water spirits of Blackwater Falls are still here. They're still powerful, still ancient, still deserving of respect. But now they're guardians again instead of monsters, and that makes all the difference in the world. Some people ask me if I'm ever tempted to leave this place, to transfer to a different park where the history isn't so complicated. The answer is no, not anymore. This is where I belong, where I can do the most good, where I can help maintain the balance between the human world and the older, deeper forces that shape our reality. Because guardians, I've learned, come in all forms. Some have scales and live in underwater caves. Others wear ranger uniforms and carry rescue equipment. All of us are just trying to protect the people we care about. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we remember how to do it with love instead of fear. My name is Thomas Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 17 years. I've seen lost hikers, bear attacks, rock slides, and flash floods. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. October 1976 was strange from the start. An early frost had killed most of the leaves while they were still green, leaving the trees looking sick and wrong. The normal sounds of the forest, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing, had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to make noise. I became a ranger after my son died. Car accident when he was 8. The drunk driver walked away without a scratch, but my boy didn't. After that, I couldn't stand being around other people's children. It hurt too much. But out here in the mountains, I found peace and purpose. I started running the park's child safety programs, teaching kids about wildlife, helping families stay together on the trails. My specialty became missing persons search and rescue, kids especially. I had a reputation for finding them when others gave up. Maybe it was guilt driving me. Maybe I thought if I saved enough children, it would somehow bring my son back. Either way, I was good at it. The Cherokee who used to live in these mountains had stories about children disappearing. They called them the Nunnehi, spirit children who lived forever, always looking for new friends to join their games. Just old stories, I told myself. Mountain folklore to explain the unexplainable. That changed when I found the bone dolls. It started with the Martinez family. They'd been camping at Dark Hollow Falls, a popular spot about 15 miles from the nearest road. Good people. Mom, Dad, and 8-year-old Emma. The kind of family that followed all the safety rules, stayed on marked trails, kept their food locked up properly. Emma had been playing near their tent, while her parents set up camp. They turned around for maybe 2 minutes to unpack the car, and she was gone, just vanished. The search began immediately. We followed protocol, contacted the sheriff, called in helicopter support, organized volunteer groups. Within hours, we had 50 people combing every inch of forest around their campsite. Dogs picked up her scent, leading toward the hollow, then lost it at a creek bed. On the second day, I found her stuffed rabbit. But it wasn't just dropped or lost. Someone had arranged it with twigs and leaves and small stones to make a crude doll. The thing was sitting upright against a tree trunk, almost like it was watching me. It was 2 miles from where Emma had disappeared, in a direction that made no sense. I told myself some kid must have found the rabbit and been playing with it. But when I checked our records, no other families with children had been in the area for weeks. The nearest campground was 20 miles away. Still, I tried to think rationally. Maybe a teenager from one of the local towns had hiked in. Maybe Emma had gotten confused and wandered farther than we thought. Maybe she'd made the doll herself before something happened to her. I bagged the rabbit as evidence and kept searching. That night, my partner Jake Morrison radioed me from his sector. His voice was shaky, which wasn't like him. Jake had been a ranger for 12 years and never lost his cool. "Thomas, you need to hear this," he said. Through the radio static, I heard children singing. It was faint, but clear enough to make out the words, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The song was coming from the direction of Dark Hollow Falls, the same area where Emma had vanished, but it was 3 in the morning. No children should have been out there. Jake, you sure that's not coming from somewhere else? Maybe a radio signal bouncing off the mountains? I'm standing right here, Thomas. There's no other explanation. It's coming from the hollow. I told him to stay put and started hiking toward his location. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, and my breath came out in white puffs. The singing stopped before I reached Jake, but I could still feel something watching us from the darkness between the trees. We searched until dawn and found nothing. No children, no signs of human activity, just the endless silence of the dead forest. The third day brought new problems. Our search equipment started acting up. Compass needles spun in wild circles. GPS units showed impossible coordinates, sometimes placing us hundreds of miles away, sometimes in locations that didn't exist. Radio communications got spotty, filled with static and strange echoes. But we kept searching. Emma Martinez was still out there somewhere, and I wasn't giving up on her. Around noon, I was checking a section of rocky terrain when I saw them. Small handprints in the mud beside a stream. Child-sized, maybe Emma's. But they led straight to a sheer cliff face 30 feet high. No way a kid could climb that. I called for rope and climbing gear, but while I waited, I found more prints. Lots more. They covered the rocks at the base of the cliff, like dozens of children had been dancing there. Some prints looked fresh, others seemed older, worn by weather, but still visible. That's when I noticed the toys. They were scattered around the base of the cliff in careful patterns. A wooden spinning top. A cloth doll with button eyes, a set of jacks made from what looked like animal bones, a toy car that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. None of them looked modern. The doll's dress was the kind children wore 50 years ago. The spinning top was hand-carved, not machine-made. Even the metal jacks looked old-fashioned. I started collecting them as evidence, but each one I picked up made me feel sick to my stomach, like they were important somehow. Like they belonged to children who'd never grown up to put away their toys. That evening, our base camp radio picked up more voices. Not singing this time, just children talking and laughing. The sound came through clear as day, but when we tried to respond, we got nothing. Static. "Marco!" called a little girl's voice. "Polo!" answered what sounded like a boy. They were playing games. At night, in the middle of a wilderness area, while we were searching for a missing child. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. My partner Jake tried to stop me. "Don't go out there alone, Thomas. Something's not right about this." But I had to know. If there were children in these woods, they might know what happened to Emma. They might need help too. I followed the voices deeper into the forest, toward Dark Hollow Falls. The temperature kept dropping, even though the weather forecast had called for a mild night. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was fighting back. The voices led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, despite 17 years of hiking these trails. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle around a patch of dead grass. In the center sat more toys, arranged in neat rows, like someone was getting ready for a tea party. "Want to play with us?" The voice came from right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing except shadows between the trees. "Who's there?" I called out. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" Giggling answered me. Not just one child, but several. They seemed to be all around me, moving through the forest just outside my flashlight's range. "We're always here," said a different voice. This one sounded older, maybe 10 or 11. "We've been waiting so long for someone new to play with." "Where are your parents?" I asked. "How did you get out here?" More giggling. Then silence. I waited in that clearing for 20 minutes, calling out questions, getting no answers. Finally, I gave up and headed back toward camp. But when I turned around, I couldn't find the path I'd used to get there. Every direction looked the same, dark trees and shifting shadows. My compass spun uselessly. My radio produced only static. I was lost in a forest I'd known my whole career. It took me 4 hours to find my way back to base camp. When I finally stumbled in, exhausted and shaking, Jake told me I'd only been gone for 30 minutes. "That's impossible," I said. "I was out there for hours." Jake showed me his watch, then the radio log. I'd left at 9:15 p.m. and returned at 9:47 p.m., 32 minutes. But I knew what I'd experienced. Time had moved differently out there in the darkness, like the forest was playing with me. That night, I dreamed about my son. He was 8 years old again, the age he'd been when he died. He was standing in that circular clearing, holding the toy car I'd found at the base of the cliff. "Come play with us, Dad," he said. "We have so much fun here. You won't have to be sad anymore." I woke up screaming. By the fourth day, word had gotten out. News crews showed up, asking questions we couldn't answer. The FBI sent a team to take over the investigation, but they couldn't explain the equipment failures or the strange evidence any better than we could. I convinced them to let me keep searching. This was my park, my responsibility, and something deep in my gut told me that Emma Martinez was still alive. That morning, I hiked back to the circular clearing. In daylight, I could see it clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The trees around the clearing weren't just old, they were carved. Symbols covered their trunks from the ground up to about 8 feet high. They looked like children's drawings, stick figures holding hands, smiling faces, simple animals. But they were carved deep into the bark, and the wood around them had grown strange and twisted. Some of the symbols were fresh, others looked decades old. A few seemed ancient, covered with moss and barely visible. At the base of one tree, I found more toys, but these were different. Modern, a plastic action figure from the 1970s, a small transistor radio, a pair of sneakers that looked like they'd been made last year. I was examining them when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Jake or one of the FBI agents. Instead, I saw children, 3 of them standing at the edge of the clearing, 2 boys and a girl, all around 8 or 9 years old. They wore old-fashioned clothes, the kind kids might have worn in the 1940s or 50s. Their skin was pale, almost white, and their eyes looked too big for their faces. "Hello, Mr. Ranger," said the girl. Her voice sounded far away, like she was calling from the bottom of a well. "Do you want to play hide and seek?" I tried to speak but couldn't. They looked so much like real children, but something about them was wrong. They stood too still. Their shadows didn't match the angle of the sun, and their eyes were completely black. "We know where Emma is," said one of the boys. "She's playing with us now. She likes our games." "Where?" I finally managed to ask. "Where is she?" The children smiled, showing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Down below," said the other boy. "In the hollow places, where it's always playtime." They turned and walked back into the forest. I followed, but they moved wrong. Their feet didn't quite touch the ground, and they seemed to float between the trees instead of pushing through the underbrush. I chased them for what felt like miles, but they stayed just ahead of me, always visible but never quite close enough to catch. They led me deeper into the mountains, to places I'd never been despite years of exploring these trails. Finally, they stopped at the mouth of a cave I'd never seen before. It was hidden behind a curtain of dead vines and looked like it went straight down into the earth. "She's down there," says Aid, the girl. "Playing with all the others. They've been waiting so long for a new friend." "How many others?" I asked. The children giggled. "Lots and lots," said the first boy. "Children from all over. Some have been playing with us for a very long time." They stepped backward into the shadows and disappeared. Not walked away, just vanished, like they'd never been there at all. I called out, but got no answer. The forest had gone completely silent again. I stood at the mouth of that cave for a long time, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Everything about it felt wrong. The air coming out was too cold, and it smelled like old flowers and wet earth. But if Emma was down there... I radioed for backup and started into the cave. The passage sloped down steeply, carved from natural rock. My flashlight beam showed symbols painted on the walls, more children's drawings, but these were done in what looked like dark red paint. Or blood. The deeper I went, the more toys I found, scattered on the cave floor like breadcrumbs. A wooden horse on wheels, a set of dominoes made from bone, a music box that played a tune I almost recognized. And then I found something that made me drop my flashlight, a small metal truck painted blue with yellow stripes. I'd bought it for my son's 7th birthday. I'd buried it with him after the accident, but here it was, impossible as that seemed, sitting in a cave hundreds of miles from his grave. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was exactly the same, right down to the small chip in the blue paint where he'd dropped it on our kitchen floor. "I've been taking care of it for you, Dad." I spun around. My son stood in the cave passage behind me, exactly as I remembered him. 8 years old, brown hair, gap-toothed smile, but his eyes were solid black, just like the other children. "Danny?" I whispered. He nodded and stepped closer. "I've been waiting for you to find me. We all have. There are so many of us now, and we need grown-ups to play with sometimes." "You're dead, son. You died in the accident." "Did I?" He tilted his head like he used to when he was thinking hard about something. "I don't remember dying. I just remember playing. We play such wonderful games here, Dad, and we never have to stop. We never have to grow up." I reached out to touch him, but my hand passed right through his face. "You're not real," I said. "Real is boring," Danny replied. "Real means people get hurt and die and go away forever. Here, nobody has to leave. We can all be together." The sound of children singing drifted up from deeper in the cave. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." "Emma's down there, isn't she?" I asked. Danny nodded. She was so lonely. Her parents were always fighting, even when they pretended not to. She wished she could go somewhere where everyone would be happy. So we brought her home. The singing got louder. More voices joined in, dozens of children all singing together. "You have to let her go," I said. "She has parents who love her." "Do they?" Danny's black eyes seemed to look right through me. "Or do they love the idea of her? The way you love the idea of me?" I staggered backward. "That's not true." "You were always working, Dad. Always busy with something more important. I used to wait by the window for you to come home from the office. Sometimes you'd be so tired you'd just go straight to bed without even saying goodnight." The words hit me like physical blows because they were true. I had been a workaholic. I had missed too many dinners, too many bedtime stories, too many chances to just be with my boy. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "It doesn't matter now," Danny said. "We can make up for all that lost time. You can stay here and play with me forever." The singing stopped suddenly. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps, coming up from the depths of the cave. Lots of them. "They want to meet you," Danny said. "All the children you couldn't save." They came out of the darkness like a parade of nightmares. Dozens of children, all with those same black eyes and too pale skin. Some wore clothes from the 1800s. Others looked like they'd disappeared last week. Boys and girls of every age, from toddlers barely old enough to walk to teenagers on the edge of growing up. But they'd never grow up. Not here. They surrounded me in the cave, reaching out with cold fingers that felt like nothing when they touched my skin. Their voices filled the air, all talking at once. "Play with us. Don't leave us alone. Stay forever. We've been so lonely." In the center of the group, I saw Emma Martinez. She looked exactly the same as in her missing person photo, except for her eyes. They were still brown, not black like the others, but they were starting to change. Dark spots swirled in the color like ink drops in water. "Mr. Ranger," she called out when she saw me. "These kids know such fun games. They taught me how to walk through walls and make myself invisible. Want to see?" She stepped backward and disappeared into the cave wall like it was made of water. A second later, she popped out of the ceiling above my head, giggling. "Emma, I need to get you back to your parents," I said. "They're very worried about you." Her smile faded. "I don't want to go back. Mommy and Daddy fight all the time. They say mean things to each other. Here nobody fights. We just play." "Fighting doesn't mean they don't love you," I said. Sometimes grown-ups fight because they're scared or sad, but that doesn't change how much they care about you. The hollow children pressed closer. I could feel the cold radiating off their bodies, could smell that strange mix of flowers and decay. "Don't listen to him, Emma," said a boy who looked like he'd been here since the Civil War. "Grown-ups always lie. They promise things they don't mean." "They hurt you and then they leave you," added a girl in a 1920s dress. "But we'll never hurt you. We'll never leave." Danny appeared next to me again. "She belongs here now, Dad. Just like I do. Just like you will." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about collecting lonely children. They wanted me too. They needed someone to blame, someone to carry the guilt of all the children who'd gone missing in these mountains over the decades. "You fed on my grief," I said. "That's how you got so strong." Danny nodded. "Guilt and sadness taste better than anything else. And you have so much of both. Enough to keep us fed forever." The children began to sing again, but this time it wasn't Ring Around the Rosie. It was something older, in a language I didn't recognize. Cherokee, maybe. The words seemed to wrap around my mind like chains. I felt my strength draining away, my vision blurred. The cave floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "Just let go," Danny whispered. "Stop fighting. Stay here with us. You can make up for all the time we lost." Emma was changing faster now. Her eyes were almost completely black, and when she smiled, her teeth looked sharp. In a few more minutes, she'd be like the rest of them, lost forever. I thought about her parents, waiting back at the search command post. I thought about all the other families who'd lost children in these mountains. I thought about my own guilt and how it had poisoned everything good in my life. But I also thought about something the Cherokee elder had told me when I first started working in the park. The spirits feed on sorrow, but they fear joy. They can't touch someone who chooses love over grief. I pulled out my radio and turned it to the emergency channel. Static filled the air, but I started talking anyway. "This is Ranger Thomas Blackthorne. I'm in a cave system in the Dark Hollow Falls area. I have Emma Martinez with me, and I'm bringing her out." The hollow children hissed and drew back. The radio signal seemed to hurt them somehow. "You can't leave," Danny said, his voice no layam, longer sounding like my son. "We won't let you." "Yes, you will," I said. I looked at Emma, who was staring at me with those half-black eyes. "Emma, do you remember what your mom packed in? Your backpack? The special thing she gave you for emergencies?" Emma blinked, and for a moment the brown color flickered back into her eyes. The whistle?" "That's right, the safety whistle. Can you blow it for me?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver whistle. When she put it to her lips and blew, the sound that came out was pure and clean and totally human. The hollow children screamed and scattered like roaches when you turn on a light. Even Danny flickered and faded. "Again!" I shouted. Emma blew the whistle 3 more times. Each blast seemed to push back the darkness to make the cave walls look more real and less like a nightmare. I grabbed her hand, solid and warm, not cold like the others, and ran for the cave entrance. Behind us, the children wailed and called out threats and promises, but they couldn't follow. The whistle had broken whatever spell held this place together. We burst out of the cave just as the sun was rising over the mountains. I could hear helicopters in the distance, search teams calling out our names. When I looked back, the cave entrance was gone, just a solid rock face covered with ordinary vines. Emma Martinez was reunited with her parents 6 hours later. The doctors at the hospital couldn't explain how she'd survived 4 days in the wilderness without food or water, but she seemed healthy, except for some memory loss. She couldn't remember much about where she'd been, just that she'd been playing with other children in a place where it was always playtime. Her eyes went back to normal brown within a few days. The official report said she'd gotten lost in an unmapped cave system and suffered mild hypothermia and disorientation. Case closed. No mention of the toys we'd found, or the radio transmissions, or the equipment failures. Just another successful search and rescue operation. But I knew better. I stayed, in the Park Service for another 10 years after that, but I was different. I could sense things now that I'd never noticed before. The wrongness in certain areas of the forest, the places where children shouldn't play alone. I started adding new warnings to the safety programs, teaching families to stay together, to carry whistles, to trust their instincts when something felt off about a location. More families listened than you might think. Word gets around about which ranger to trust. I also started talking to the Cherokee elders more, learning their stories about the spirits in these mountains. Turns out the Nunahai weren't the only things living in the hollow places. There were older spirits, hungrier ones, that had learned to imitate the legends to lure in new victims. The bone dolls still showed up sometimes, arranged in patterns near popular camping areas. I'd find them during my patrols and take them apart, scattering the pieces far from each other. It seemed to help, at least temporarily. I never saw Danny again, not the hollow version anyway. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I was hiking alone, I'd hear children singing in the distance. Not the hollow children. These voices were different, peaceful, like they were finally at rest. Maybe that's what happened when the cave collapsed. Maybe some of those trapped spirits were freed. I like to think so. I retired from the Park Service in 1986, but I still live near Shenandoah, still keep an eye on things, still help out with search and rescue when they need an old hand who knows the mountains. And I still carry a whistle on every hike, just in case. Last month, a family from Ohio asked me about camping near Dark Hollow Falls. Nice people, mom, dad, and twin boys about 7 years old. The kind of family that follows all the safety rules. I told them about the bears and the weather and the importance of staying on the marked trails, all the usual warnings. But as they were leaving, I made sure to mention one more thing. If you hear children singing in these mountains, I said, especially at night, don't follow the music, and make sure your boys know that too. The father looked puzzled, but the mother nodded like she understood. Some people have good instincts about these things. They had a wonderful camping trip, by the way. No problems at all. But that's the thing about the hollow places. They're patient. They can wait decades for the right victim, the right combination of loneliness and guilt and sorrow. They're still out there, in the deep woods where the maps have blank spaces and the compass needles spin in circles, waiting for lost children, waiting for grieving parents, waiting for anyone foolish enough to follow the sound of laughter in the dark. So if you ever find yourself hiking in the mountains, and you come across toys arranged in patterns, or children's voices where no children should be, remember what I've told you. Turn around. Walk away. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're listening. Some games are too dangerous to play. My name is Samuel Ashford, and after 22 years working these mountains, I thought I knew every sound they could make. The wind through the pines, the crack of ice on stone, even the way your own voice bounces back from the cliffs. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. I'm a park ranger at Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina. Been walking these trails since 1965 when I came back from Vietnam looking for some peace and quiet. The mountains gave me that, mostly. Up here, the only sounds that matter are the ones that keep you alive. Rockfall warnings, weather changes, the whistle you blow when someone's lost. November 1987 started like any other winter. First big snow came early, thick and heavy, closing the high roads and cutting us off from the outside world. That's normal. What wasn't normal was what happened 3 days into the storm. I was checking the radio tower up on Callaway Peak when I heard it. A whistle. Not the sharp blast of an emergency signal, but something else. Long and low, like someone calling across a great distance. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped walking and listened hard. After 2 decades up here, you learn to pay attention when something doesn't sound right. The whistle came again, clearer this time. It sounded almost friendly, like someone saying hello. "Hello!" I called back, cupping my hands around my mouth. "You need help?" "Nothing. Just wind through the trees." I figured it was probably hikers who got caught by the storm. Happens all the time. People think they can handle mountain weather until they're stuck in 3 feet of snow with no way down. I changed direction and headed toward where I thought the sound came from. But after an hour of searching, I found nothing. No tracks, no campsites, no people, just snow and silence. That night, back at the ranger station, I called it in to my supervisor, Standard Prox. Ejur, any contact with possible lost hikers gets reported even if you don't find them. Probably just wind, he said. You know how weird the acoustics get up there in winter. I wanted to agree with him. I really did. Because in Vietnam, I learned to trust my ears. They kept me alive when my eyes couldn't, and my ears were telling me that whistle wasn't made by wind. The next morning brought more reports. 3 different hikers called in to say they'd heard whistling while on the lower trails. All of them described the same thing, a long, musical sound that seemed to follow them through the woods. Maybe it's an echo, suggested Jenny Martinez, the other ranger on duty. Sound travels funny in this weather. But I'd been thinking about it all night, and echoes don't work that way. Echoes copy what you make. They don't start conversations. I decided to investigate properly, grabbed my gear, radio, first aid kit, emergency whistle, and a small tape recorder I used for incident reports. If there really was someone out there making these sounds, I wanted proof. The trail to Rough Ridge was packed down from the other hikers, making for easy walking. About halfway up, I heard it again. That same long, low whistle coming from somewhere ahead of me. This time I was ready. I pressed record on the tape player and whistled back. 3 short blasts, the universal signal for, "I hear you, where are you?" What happened next made my blood run cold. The whistle answered. 3 short blasts, exactly like mine. But they came from behind me. I spun around, scanning the trail. Empty. No footprints in the fresh snow except my own. I looked at the tape recorder. The needle was jumping, recording something. But the sound hadn't come from any direction. It had just appeared. My hands started shaking, and not from the cold. In Vietnam, we had codes, signals, ways to communicate without words. The enemy learned some of them. They'd use our own signals against us, whistle our formations back to us to cause confusion. But this wasn't Vietnam. This was North Carolina, and there was no enemy here. Was there? The reports kept coming in. By the end of the week, 12 different people had heard the whistling. But here's what bothered me. They all heard different things. Mrs. Patterson from Boone said it sounded like her late husband calling her name. A couple from Virginia claimed it was playing Happy Birthday because it was their anniversary. A group of college kids swore it was copying their conversation from earlier that morning, word for word. That's not how sound works. Sound doesn't change based on who's listening to it. I partnered up with Dave Rodriguez, another Vietnam vet who'd been working the mountains for 15 years. Dave had seen enough strange things to take the reports seriously, but he was also practical. "Let's figure this out," he said, loading his pack with equipment. "We'll triangulate the sound, record it from multiple positions, get some real data." We set out before dawn, taking positions on opposite sides of Rough Ridge. The plan was simple. When we heard the whistling, we'd both record it and compare the results. Basic science. At 7:43 a.m., it started. A long, mournful sound drifted across the valley. I hit record and checked my compass, trying to pinpoint the direction. The needle spun wildly like there was a magnet nearby. "Dave, you getting this?" I spoke into the radio. His voice crackled back, strange and distant. Sam, you need to hear this." "What is it?" It's playing Las Mañanitas, the song Maria used to sing to the kids." Maria was Dave's wife. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. I felt ice form in my stomach. "Dave, that's impossible." "I know it's impossible." His voice was shaking. "But I'm hearing it, Sam, clear as day. It's her voice, her exact voice, singing our daughter to sleep." The whistling stopped. The forest went dead silent. No birds, no wind, no small animals rustling in the brush. Even our radios went quiet. Then it started again. But now it was coming from right behind me. I turned around slowly, afraid of what I might see. Nothing, just trees and snow. But the sound was so close I could feel it, like someone was standing next to my ear and humming. That's when I realized what it was doing. It wasn't just making noise. It was listening first, learning, then giving back what it thought we wanted to hear, like a twisted game of telephone. "Dave," I whispered into the radio. "Dave, respond." Static. "Dave." More static then. "Sam, where are you? I've been calling for an hour." "I'm right where I'm supposed to be." "Where are you?" I don't know. I followed the singing and now I'm somewhere I don't recognize. Everything looks the same. A chill ran down my spine. "Describe what you see." "Trees, snow, a trail that keeps going uphill no matter which way I walk." That was impossible. Our mountains had peaks and valleys, ups and downs. No trail just went up forever. "Drop a marker and stay put," I told him. "I'm coming to find you." It took me 4 hours to locate Dave. I found him sitting on a fallen log, staring at his compass with a confused look on his face. "The needle won't point north," he said. "It just spins." I checked my own compass. Same thing. The needle turned in lazy circles like it was looking for something it couldn't find. "How long were you walking?" I asked. 20 minutes, maybe 30. According to my GPS, Dave had somehow traveled 6 miles, in a straight line, through terrain that didn't exist on any map. That night we played back our recordings. Mine had captured the original whistling, long, low, and musical. Dave's tape was different. It had recorded a woman's voice singing a Spanish lullaby. But here's what really scared me. When we played them at the same time, they harmonized perfectly. "It's learning," Dave said quietly. "Whatever it is, it's learning our sounds." I thought about the reports from other hikers. Different sounds for different people, but all of them meaningful, all of them personal. "It's not just learning," I said. "It's hunting." The next morning, Dave called in sick. Said he needed a few days to think things through. I didn't blame him. Hearing your dead wife's voice would mess with anyone's head, but I couldn't let it go. As a ranger, my job was to keep people safe. And something was out there in my mountains, something that could copy voices and lead experienced hikers into places that shouldn't exist. I went back out alone, carrying every piece of recording equipment I could find. This time, I wasn't just investigating, I was setting a trap. If this thing wanted to play with sounds, I'd give it something to think about. I set up my equipment at the stone circle near Daniel Boone's Scout Trail, a place where Cherokee used to hold ceremonies back before we moved them out. The stones were arranged in perfect acoustics, making voices carry farther than they should. If something was playing games with sound, this would be the place to catch it. The plan was simple. Record myself making different noises, then see what came back. I started with basic calls. "Hello," "Help," "Over here." Nothing fancy. What I got back changed everything I thought I knew about what was possible. The first response came about an hour after I started. A clear, strong voice called, "Hello, Sam." I hadn't said my name. "Who is this?" I called back. "This is Jerry Williams, Sam. You remember me." My blood turned to ice water. Jerry Williams had been my radio operator in Vietnam. He'd died in 1969, torn apart by shrapnel while calling in coordinates for a medical evacuation. "Jerry's dead," I said out loud, as much to convince myself as anything. "Death's just another frequency, Sam, and I've been trying to reach you for 18 years. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every little pause Jerry used to make when he was thinking. Then the way he said Sam, like it had 2 syllables. I grabbed my radio and tried to call for backup, but all I got was static. Then, through the static, I heard more voices. Dave Rodriguez talking to his wife. Mrs. Patterson having a conversation with her husband. Other voices I didn't recognize, but they all sounded like they were talking to people who weren't there. Or maybe people who were there, just not in the same world as the rest of us. "Sam, Jerry's voice continued. You need to understand what's happening here. This place, it collects sounds, voices, conversations. Everything that's ever been said in these mountains, it's all still here, waiting. That's impossible. Is it? You've heard the Cherokee stories. They say sound never dies. It just gets absorbed into the rocks and trees. This whole mountain range is like a giant recording device, Sam, and something's learned how to play it back. I looked at the stone circle around me. The rocks were old, older than anything else on the mountain, worn smooth by centuries of weather, arranged in patterns that seemed random but felt intentional. What wants the sounds? I asked. Something that's been hungry for a very long time, something that feeds on voices, on the things people say when they think no one's listening. It's been collecting for centuries, Sam. Cherokee voices, settler voices, soldiers' voices. All of us. A new sound joined the conversation. Footsteps in the snow, coming from every direction at once. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to shake the ground. It's coming, Sam. You need to understand. This thing doesn't just collect sounds. It collects the people who make them. And once it has your voice, it has you. The footsteps got closer. I grabbed my equipment and started backing away from the stone circle, but the steps followed me. Not just followed. They surrounded me. Jerry, I whispered. Paired. How do I fight something like this? You can't fight it, Sam, but you can confuse it. Make noise it can't copy, sounds that don't mean anything. That's the only way to... His voice, cut off mid-sentence, replaced by something else. Something that definitely wasn't human. It was a low, rumbling sound, like rocks grinding together. But underneath it, I could hear whispers. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize, mixed with others I knew too well. My mother calling me for dinner when I was 7. My drill sergeant shouting commands. My buddies in Vietnam talking about home. All of them layered together into one massive, impossible chorus. And then, rising above all of them, I heard my own voice. My name is Samuel Ashford, it said, and I'm lost in the mountains. But I hadn't said that. I was standing right here, listening to myself speak words I'd never spoken. I followed the whistling, my voice continued, and now I can't find my way back. If anyone can hear this, please send help. I'm at the stone circle near Daniel Boone Trail, and something's wrong here. Something's very wrong. It was a perfect recording of my voice, my speech patterns, even the way I breathed between sentences. But it was saying things I'd never said, asking for help I'd never requested. That's when I understood what Jerry had been trying to tell me. This thing didn't just collect voices, it used them. It could make anyone sound like they were saying anything. Perfect copies, perfect lies. How many lost hikers had actually been this thing calling for help in voices it had stolen? How many rescue operations had been traps? The grinding sound got louder, and through the trees I saw something moving. Something tall and wrong, with too many joints in places where joints shouldn't be. It moved between the trees like smoke, never quite solid enough to see clearly, but definitely there. And it was whistling, the same long, low whistle I'd been hearing all week. But now I could tell it wasn't coming from its mouth, or whatever it had, instead of a mouth. The sound was coming from inside it, like its whole body was hollow and the wind was blowing through it. My emergency whistle was in my hand before I realized I'd grabbed it. 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal. The thing stopped moving. The whistling stopped. Even the whispers went quiet. Then it whistled back. 3 sharp blasts, exactly like mine. But this time, the sound came from 12 different directions at once. I ran. I ran through snow and ice, crashing through branches, sliding down slopes I couldn't see in the growing darkness. Behind me, that thing kept whistling. My own emergency signal played back at me over and over, like it was mocking everything I'd learned about survival. But here's what scared me most. I wasn't running randomly. Even in my panic, my feet were following a path. A path I'd never seen before, but somehow knew exactly where it led. It led up. Always up. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing I didn't recognize. The snow here was different. Older, deeper, with a strange blue tint that had nothing to do with moonlight. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that shouldn't exist. It looked like a cage made of sound. That's the only way I can describe it. Thick streams of what looked like frozen air stretched between tall stone pillars, creating walls you could see through but somehow knew you couldn't pass. And inside the cage, moving back and forth like trapped animals, were people. At least they looked like people. I got closer and realized they weren't moving the way humans move. They were repeating the same actions over and over. Walking 3 steps, turning around, walking back, like a record stuck on repeat. "Help!" one of them called out. A woman's voice, clear and desperate. "Please help us. We're trapped." But when I looked at her mouth, it wasn't moving. The voice was coming from somewhere else, like a badly dubbed movie. "We've been lost for days," said a man near the back of the cage. His mouth wasn't moving either. "The whistling led us here, and now we can't get out." I recognized that voice. It was Dave Rodriguez. "Dave?" I called out. The man turned toward me. It was Dave's face, Dave's uniform, even Dave's scar from a fishing accident 5 years ago. But his eyes were wrong. They moved too fast, looking at everything and nothing. "Sam?" the Dave thing said, but the voice was coming from the woman. "Thank God you found us. The thing that whistles. It's been keeping us here. You need to get us out." Another voice joined in, this one from a teenager I didn't recognize. "It feeds on our voices, Sam. Every word we speak makes it stronger." And another from an old man. "But it can't take what we don't give freely. That's the key, Sam. That's how you beat it." They were all talking at once now, a chorus of voices coming from bodies that weren't making the sounds. And slowly, I began to understand what I was looking at. These weren't people. These were echoes. Copies made from stolen voices, given just enough form to seem real. The thing that whistles had been perfecting its imitations, practicing until it could create perfect puppets. But if these were copies, where were the real people? "The real people are gone, Sam," said Jerry Williams's voice coming from the mouth of a child. Absorbed. Their voices, their memories, their last words. All of it stored inside the collector. "What is the collector?" I asked. All the fake people turned to look at me at once. When they spoke, it was in perfect unison, using my own voice. "I am the collector. I am the sound between sounds, the echo that comes before the call. I have been gathering voices since the first humans spoke in these mountains, and I will continue gathering until the mountains themselves fall silent." The air around me started to vibrate, and I realized the thing was here. Not just nearby. Here, in this clearing, maybe in this very spot all along. The cage wasn't keeping the fake people in. It was keeping me in. "Every sound you have made, Samuel Ashford, is now part of me." My own voice continued from a dozen different mouths. "Every word, every breath, every heartbeat. I know you better than you know yourself." That's when I remembered what Jerry had tried to tell me. The only way to confuse it was with sounds that didn't mean anything. I thought about my training in Vietnam. Radio operators learn to make meaningless noise, static, feedback, random sequences that carry no information. We called it noise discipline. I took out my emergency whistle and blew it in random patterns. Not the 3-blast distress signal, not any recognized code, just noise. The fake people stopped moving, their heads tilted like dogs hearing a strange sound. I kept whistling random notes, mixing in meaningless syllables, humming tunes that went nowhere. The cage began to flicker like a TV with bad reception. "What are you doing?" the voices asked, but now they sounded uncertain. I whistled louder, adding hand claps and foot stomps, rhythm without pattern, melody without meaning. pure chaos. The stone pillars started to crack. The fake people became transparent, their faces showing confusion instead of the empty stares they'd worn before. And then, rising out of the ground like smoke, came the real collector. It was 12 feet tall and made of sound given form. Not flesh and bone, but compressed air and vibration shaped into something almost human. Its chest was hollow, a resonating chamber that had been storing voices for centuries, and when it opened its mouth, every sound it had ever stolen came pouring out at once. But I kept making meaningless noise, and for the first time in maybe hundreds of years, the collector heard something it couldn't copy. The battle lasted until dawn, though battle isn't really the right word. It wabbed. It's more like a conversation in a language neither of us fully understood. The collector threw stolen voices at me. My mother, my friends, everyone I'd ever cared about, begging me to stop, making noise. But I'd learned something in that cage of fake people. The moment you listen to what this thing is saying, you're lost. So I didn't listen. I kept whistling random notes, humming songs backwards, making every meaningless sound I could think of. And slowly the collector began to fall apart. Not dying. Something like this doesn't die. But losing its grip on the sounds it had stolen. I watched voices leak out of its hollow chest, like water from a cracked jar. The Cherokee voices it had taken centuries ago. The settlers who'd vanished in these mountains. The hikers who'd gone missing over the years, following whistles that led them into places they couldn't return from. All those voices, finally free to fade away naturally, instead of being trapped in an eternal echo. As the sun came up, the collector made one last attempt to save itself. It tried to copy the meaningless sounds I was making, to turn my own chaos against me. But meaningless noise can't be copied, because there's nothing to copy. It's just sound being sound, without purpose or pattern. The thing that had fed on human voices for centuries couldn't understand noise that meant nothing. It collapsed into itself, imploding like a building with its supports knocked out. The fake people in the cage disappeared. The stone pillars crumbled. Even the blue-tinted snow melted away, leaving just a normal forest clearing. I sat there for a long time, listening to the ordinary sounds of morning in the mountains. Birds singing, wind through the trees, the distant sound of traffic on the highway below. Normal sounds, beautiful sounds, sounds that belonged to the world I understood. When I finally made it back to the ranger station, I filed a report about dangerous weather conditions and unstable snow formations. I recommended the upper trails be closed until further notice, citing unusual acoustic phenomena that could disorient hikers. The Park Service bought it. They always listen when a ranger with 22 years of experience says something's dangerous. Dave Rodriguez came back to work the following week. He didn't remember anything about hearing his wife's voice or getting lost in impossible terrain. As far as he knew, he'd just taken a few sick days to deal with a bad cold. The other hikers who'd reported strange whistling. Most of them forgot about it within a month. Our minds are good at explaining away things that don't fit. But I remember everything. I still work these mountains, still walk the trails, still help lost hikers find their way home. But now I listen differently. I know that sound never truly dies up here. It just waits, absorbed into the rocks and trees, ready to be played back by something that understands its value. The collector is gone, scattered into whatever dimension things like that come from. But it wasn't the only one. These mountains are old, and they've been collecting sounds for a very long time. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm doing equipment checks on the high trails, I hear whispers in languages I don't recognize. Cherokee voices sharing stories, settler families calling to each other across valleys, children playing games that were forgotten 100 years ago. They're not trapped anymore. They're just there. Part of the mountain's memory, the way an old house remembers the people who lived in it. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear that long, low whistle drifting up from the deeper valleys. Not the collector. Something else. Something that's learned to be more careful about the sounds it makes. I don't investigate anymore. Some things are better left alone. But I carry my emergency whistle everywhere now, and I've taught myself to make meaningless noise whenever I need to, just in case. Because after 22 years in Tuelhuten, These mountains, I've learned the most important lesson of all. If something whistles back at you in the wilderness, don't whistle again. Just make noise that means nothing at all. And walk away as fast as you can. The mountains will understand. My name is Rebecca Ironwood, and I've spent the last 13 years studying wildlife in the Great Smoky Mountains. I track bears, count deer, and teach campers how to stay safe in the wilderness. People trust me because I know these mountains better than anyone. I came here after burning out in the city. Too much concrete, too much noise, too many people who never looked up at the sky. The mountains called to me, and I answered. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. My specialty is large predators, mainly black bears. I know how they move, what they eat, where they sleep. I can tell you which bear left tracks just by looking at the size and shape of the paw print. I've handled hundreds of bear encounters, and I've never been wrong about animal behavior. At least that's what I thought until July 1983. That summer was different. The heat was brutal, worse than anyone could remember. Streams that never dried up turned to dust. Animals came down from the high country looking for water, showing up in places they'd never been seen before. The whole forest felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. I was working the Cataract Falls area, 20 miles from the nearest town. It's beautiful country, deep valleys, old-growth forest, and waterfalls that pour down rock faces like liquid silver. But that summer, even Cataract Falls was running low. The Cherokee people who lived here first had stories about this place. They called something Kekle Kudle, the horrible giant. Their elders said it lived in the deep woods and took people who wandered too far from the fire. I'd always figured those were just stories to keep kids from getting lost. I should have listened better. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. I was checking my trail cameras when I got a radio call from headquarters. A family had been attacked at their campsite near Cataract Falls. The parents and their teenage daughter survived, but their youngest boy was missing. "What kind of animal?" I asked, already packing my gear. "They say it walked on 2 legs, dispatch told me. Said it was 10 feet tall and smart enough to use tools." I rolled my eyes. Scared people always exaggerate. A standing bear looks huge in the dark, and any animal can seem smarter than it is when you're terrified. But when I got to the campsite, I stopped rolling my eyes. The damage was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The tent wasn't just torn, it was opened with precision, like something had carefully unzipped it. The cooler had been pried apart with what looked like a wooden lever, and the claw marks on the trees. I've measured thousands of bear claws on bark. These marks were 12 feet off the ground, made by something with fingers long enough to span my whole hand. The scratches went deep into the oak, deeper than any bear could manage. The family was being treated for shock at the ranger station. I interviewed them as gently as I could. "It walked like a person," the mother kept saying, "but it was huge, covered in dark hair. Its eyes looked right at us like it was thinking." The father nodded. "It took our camping gear and arranged it in piles, like it was sorting through our stuff, deciding what it wanted." Their daughter, maybe 16, whispered, "It took Tommy, but first it looked at each of us, like it was choosing. Tommy tried to run and it just picked him up and walked away." I spent 3 days searching for the boy. I found his sneakers by the creek, placed neatly side by side like someone had carefully removed them. But no Tommy. What bothered me most were the tracks. They were human-shaped but wrong, too big, too deep, with toes that had claws. And they showed intelligence. The creature had stepped on rocks and hard ground whenever possible, trying to hit Diet's trail. Bears don't do that. I told myself it had to be a rogue bear, maybe sick or injured. But deep down I knew I was lying. In 13 years of tracking, I'd never seen anything like this. And the worst part? I had the feeling that whatever made those tracks was still watching me. Over the next week, I set up the most complete tracking operation of my career. Trail cameras, every 50 yards, motion sensors, even some experimental equipment borrowed from a university research project. If something was out there, I was going to find it. Dr. Martinez from the State Wildlife Department came up to help. He's a good man, careful and scientific. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it would be him. "What do you really think we're dealing with?" he asked on our second day out. I showed him the plaster casts I'd made of the tracks. Each footprint was 18 inches long, with articulated toes that showed clear claw marks. Martinez turned the cast over in his hands, frowning. "This is impossible, Rebecca. Look at the arch, the way the weight is distributed. This thing would have to weigh at least 400 pounds, but the gait shows it was running. Nothing that heavy can move this fast on two legs." "I know," I said, "but the evidence doesn't lie." That's when the equipment started failing. My trail cameras, professional grade, built to last for months in harsh weather, were being destroyed. Not knocked over by wind or chewed by animals. Destroyed. I found one camera that had been taken apart piece by piece, its parts arranged in a neat circle around a tree. The motion sensors went quiet one by one. When I checked them, I found they'd been moved. Not damaged, moved. Repositioned to face different directions like something was playing with them. But the GPS units were the worst. They tracked movement through the forest, and what they showed me made my blood run cold. Something was following our tracking routes. It had learned our patterns, figured out where we'd been and where we were going next. "It's studying us," Martinez said, staring at the GPS data. "Look at this pattern. It's staying just outside our search grid, but it's watching everything we do." The forest itself felt wrong. Animals that should have been everywhere were gone. No birdsong, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing, just silence that pressed against my ears like cotton. On the fourth night, I was checking the cameras near Devil's Backbone Ridge when I heard it. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a low vibration that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite speech, but there was intelligence in it, like it was trying to communicate. I grabbed my radio. "Martinez, are you getting this?" Static answered me. Then, impossibly, that low sound came through the radio speaker. Whatever was making the noise was close enough to interfere with our equipment. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the trees. The beam caught something moving between the pines, a shadow that was too big and moved too smoothly to be natural. When I got back to camp, Martinez was gone. I found him the next morning, sitting by the cold ashes of our fire. He was staring into the woods with empty eyes. "Martinez? What happened? Where were you?" He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. I don't remember. I was here and then it was morning." He held up his notebook. "Look at this." His neat handwriting filled the page, but the words made no sense. Measurements, coordinates, detailed observations about something he called the Guardian. At the bottom, in handwriting that didn't look quite like his, were the words, "It remembers the old ways." "Did you write this?" "I must have, but I don't remember any of it." That afternoon we found the shrine. Deep in a valley I'd never seen before, despite knowing these mountains for over a decade, something had built a circle of standing stones. They weren't big, about knee-high, but they were arranged with perfect precision around a natural depression in the rock. Inside the circle were human belongings, camping gear, hiking boots, jewelry, car keys, all arranged by type, like a museum display. Some of the items looked old, maybe from decades ago. Others were new. I recognized a few things from the missing family's gear. But what made my hands shake was what I found at the center of the display. A ranger badge tarnished with age. The name read J. Patterson, 1962. I knew that name. Jake Patterson had been a ranger here before I was born. He'd disappeared on a routine patrol and was never found. The story was legend around the station. "We need to leave," Martinez whispered. "This isn't natural." But as we turned to go, I saw them. Footprints in the soft earth around the shrine, leading away into the deeper woods. The same impossible tracks I'd been following for a week. Only this time, they were fresh, and they were heading toward the main campground where families with children were setting up for the weekend. Something had been collecting souvenirs from its victims for over 20 years. and now it was getting hungry again. I couldn't let families walk into danger. Martinez and I split up. He went to warn the rangers and evacuate the campgrounds, while I followed the tracks deeper into the wilderness. The trail led me places I'd never been, through parts of the forest that didn't appear on any map. Old-growth trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, like living architecture. Streams flowed uphill for short distances before correcting themselves. The very landscape felt ancient and aware. By evening, I was completely lost. My compass spun in circles and my GPS showed impossible readings. The sun was setting, but I couldn't tell which direction was west. That's when I found the cave. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the passage opened into a vast chamber lit by phosphorescent moss and an opening in the ceiling far above. What I saw there will haunt me forever. The cave was furnished like a primitive home. Sleeping areas made from animal furs and human blankets. Tools crafted from metal and wood, some obviously stolen from campers, others carved with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. And bones, human bones, arranged in careful patterns along the walls. Some were old, bleached white with age. Others still had bits of clothing attached. But the worst part was the living area. 3 people sat against the far wall, bound with ropes made from braided plant fibers. A middle-aged man, a teenage girl, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Tommy, the missing child from the first attack. "Help us," the man whispered when he saw me. "Please, it's been keeping us here for days. It brings us food, water, like we're pets." I cut their ropes with my knife, my hands shaking. "How many others?" "There were 2 more when I got here," the girl said. "But it took them away yesterday. They were crying too much." Tommy just stared at me with empty eyes. Whatever he'd seen had broken something inside him. "We have to move now," I said. "Can you all walk?" But as we turned toward the entrance, we heard it. That low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Only now, it was closer, and there was something almost like laughter in it. A shadow filled the cave entrance. It stood there for a moment, blocking out the last of the daylight, then stepped into the chamber. I finally saw it clearly. 10 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark hair that seemed to absorb light. Its body was human-shaped, but wrong. Too long in the arms, too broad in the chest, muscles that bunched and moved under its skin like cables under tension. Its face was the worst part. Almost human, but with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much malevolent awareness. It looked at each of us individually, the way a person might examine insects in a jar. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. The words weren't English, but somehow I understood them. Ancient. Words that bypassed my ears and went straight into my brain. Mine. This place. Always mine. It gestured to the bones on the walls, then to us. You take the green places. You poison the water. You drive away the old things. But I remain. The creature, I couldn't think of it as an animal anymore, picked up a human skull from one of the bone arrangements. Its fingers were as long as my forearm, ending in claws that could tear through tree bark like paper. I was here before your kind came. I will be here when you are all just bones in my home. What do you want? I managed to ask. It looked directly at me, and I felt its thoughts pressing against my mind like cold fingers. I want you to understand. You study the animals, yes? You think you know the wild places? But you know nothing. You are the animals now, and I am the hunter. The teenage girl whimpered, and the creature turned its attention to her. It reached out with one massive hand and gently touched her face. She froze like a rabbit caught in headlights. The young ones learn faster. They remember the old fear, but the old ones like you. It looked back at me. You have forgotten your place in the food chain. It gestured toward the cave entrance with casual authority. Go, run, use your tools and your knowledge. Show me you deserve to live in my forest. And if I don't? The creature picked up Tommy like he weighed nothing and held him close to its chest. The boy didn't struggle. He was beyond fear now, lost in shock. Then I keep collecting and teaching until humans remember what they forgot. It started walking toward a passage at the back of the cave, deeper into the mountain. Over its shoulder, it added, "You have until the moon is full. 3 days. Make them count." Then it was gone, taking Tommy with it, leaving the rest of us alone in a cave full of bones. I had 3 days to become a predator, good enough to hunt something that had been killing humans for decades. 3 days to save a child, and probably many others. 3 days to prove I deserved to live in the beast's forest. Getting the other captives to safety took most of the first day. The man, a hiker who'd been taken 2 weeks earlier, was in bad shape, dehydrated and half crazy from captivity. The teenage girl was stronger, but she wouldn't stop shaking. I led them out of the impossible valley using techniques I'd learned from Cherokee elders years ago. Following water sounds, reading the way plants grew, trusting instincts over instruments. My compass and GPS were useless here, but the old ways worked. When we reached the main trail, I sent them toward the ranger station with my radio and emergency flare. Then I went back. I knew I was walking into a trap. The beast had let us go for a reason, and it wasn't kindness. It wanted to hunt me specifically, to test its skills against someone who thought they understood the wilderness. But I had advantages too. 13 years of tracking had taught me how predators think, how they move, how they choose their ground. And the beast, for all its intelligence, was still following patterns. I studied those patterns. It hunted at night, when darkness gave it even more advantage over human prey. It preferred valleys and dense forest, where it could move without being seen. And it was territorial. All the attacks had happened within a 5-mile radius of the bone cave. Most importantly, it was proud. It had let me go not just to hunt me, but to prove its superiority. That pride might be the only weakness it had. The second day, I prepared. I know the forest better than any human alive, but the beast knew it better than me. So I had to change the rules. I couldn't outrun it or overpower it, but maybe I could outsmart it. Fire was the key. Every animal, no matter how intelligent, fears fire. It's programmed into their deepest instincts, and in this drought, the whole forest was ready to burn. I spent hours setting up a network of small fires, controlled burns that could be triggered quickly. I used ranger techniques I'd learned in fire management training, creating fire breaks and escape routes. If I could control the fire, I could control the battlefield. Then I waited. The beast came for me on the third night, just as the full moon rose over the mountain peaks. I heard it moving through the forest long before I saw it. Branches breaking, the soft pad of enormous feet on dead leaves, and always that low vibrating sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was playing with me, letting me know it was there. Psychological warfare. But two could play that game. I lit the first fire. The dry underbrush caught immediately, flames racing up dead tree trunks and spreading faster than anything could run. The beast's roar of rage echoed off the valley walls. I'd invaded its territory with humanity's oldest weapon. Through the smoke and dancing light, I saw it clearly for the first time. 10 feet of muscle and hatred, eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors. It was beautiful in a terrible way, perfectly adapted to kill and survive. But it was also afraid. For the first time in probably decades, something had surprised it. I lit the second fire, then the third. Soon I had a ring of flames around the clearing with narrow gaps that I could escape through, but that would force the beast to expose itself if it wanted to follow. "Come on," I shouted through the smoke. "You wanted to hunt? Let's hunt." The beast circled the fires, looking for an opening. But every time it tried to approach, I lit another barrier. The flames danced between us like a wall of light and heat. Finally, it did something I didn't expect. It picked up a burning branch and threw it at me. The creature could use fire as a weapon. All my preparations were useless if it could turn my own trap against me. I ran. The chase through the burning forest was like something from a nightmare. The beast could move faster than should have been possible, leaping over fallen logs and dodging through trees with impossible grace. Behind us, the fires I'd set were spreading, turning night into orange-tinted day. I had one last card to play. Deep in the forest was an old mine shaft, abandoned since the 1940s. The entrance was barely wide enough for a person, but inside it opened into worked tunnels where the beast's size would be a disadvantage instead of an asset. I reached the mine entrance with seconds to spare. The beast's claws scraped stone as I dove into the narrow opening. It roared in frustration, too large to follow immediately, but I could hear it digging, using its claws and strength to widen the entrance. In minutes, it would be inside with me. I crawled through the tunnels by feel, heading for the main chamber I'd explored years ago. My flashlight beam showed me what I was looking for. Old mining equipment, including several sticks of dynamite that miners had left behind. The dynamite was old and probably unstable, but it was my only chance. When the beast finally squeezed into the main chamber, I was waiting. The explosion brought down half the mountain. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, treated for smoke inhalation and burns. They told me a forest fire had burned through 15 square miles of wilderness and that I'd been found unconscious at the edge of the burn zone. Tommy was found too, alive but changed. He never spoke about what happened in the cave, and his family moved away within a month. The official report listed the mine collapse as accidental, caused by the forest fire weakening old support beams. The beast was never mentioned, but I know it survived. That was 40 years ago. I retired from the ranger service eventually, but I never left the mountains. I couldn't. The beast survived the mine collapse, though I hurt it badly. I've seen its tracks a few times over the years, always in the deepest wilderness, always far from human trails. It's more careful now, more selective. The random attacks stopped, but it's still out there. I learned things in that cave that changed how I see the world. The Cherokee stories weren't just folklore. They were warnings passed down from people who understood what lived in the deep places. The beast isn't evil exactly, any more than a wolf is evil for hunting deer. It's old, older than human civilization, and it sees us the way we see any invasive species. We took its forest. It adapted. I spend my time now monitoring the balance between the human world and the wild places. There are boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, territories that should be left alone. The beast taught me that some things in these mountains earned the right to be here long before we did. Every few years, I find signs that it's still active. A hiker who disappears without a trace in the deep wilderness. Camping gear found arranged in neat piles near remote caves. Park rangers who report equipment failures and lost time in certain valleys. I don't report these incidents anymore. Instead, I quietly make sure those areas get marked as dangerous on the maps. Trails get closed for erosion control or wildlife protection. Campgrounds get relocated away from the old hunting grounds. Most people think I'm just a crazy old woman who spent too many years alone in the woods. They're probably right about the crazy part. But I know what I know. The beast keeps its bargain. It stays in the deep places, away from casual hikers and families with children. But it's still teaching lessons to anyone arrogant enough to push too far into its domain. Last month, a group of college kids went missing while exploring some unmarked caves near Cataract Falls. They were found 3 days later, sitting around their cold campfire with no memory of where they'd been. Their camping gear was missing, and they had identical scratches on their arms. 3 parallel lines, too precise to be accidental. When the rangers asked me about it, I just told them the kids probably got lost and scared. Animals can seem pretty threatening in the dark, but I know better. The beast is still out there, still protecting its territory, still teaching humans about their place in the food chain. And as long as people respect the boundaries, as long as they remember that some places belong to older, wilder things, it will leave them alone. The forest has its own justice. It always has. Some nights, when the wind is right, I can still hear that low, vibrating sound echoing through the valleys. Not threatening now, just present. A reminder that the wild places have their own guardians, and some of them remember when humans knew enough to be afraid of the dark. I'm getting old now, too old to keep hiking the deep trails. Soon I'll have to trust someone else to watch for the signs and maintain the boundaries. I've been training a few younger rangers, teaching them the old skills and older wisdom. They think I'm teaching them about bears and mountain lions. They don't need to know the whole truth yet. But when they're ready, when they've earned the right to understand, I'll tell them about the beast of Cataract Falls. Until then, I keep watch. And I remember what the Cherokee elders knew, that respect is the price of survival, and the wildest things are often the wisest. The mountains keep their secrets well, but they keep their bargains better. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains, stick to the marked trails. Don't camp in valleys that feel too quiet. And if you hear a sound like distant thunder that seems to come from everywhere at once, don't try to find out what made it. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some hungers are older than human understanding. And some things in these mountains have earned the right to be left alone. My name is Maria Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, way up on Spruce Knob where the trees grow thick and the mountain keeps its secrets. My job is protecting old sites, places where people lived and died long before any of us were born. I studied bones and old things in college. Anthropology, they called it. I thought I understood death back then. I thought I knew what the dead wanted. March 1979 was when everything changed. The snow was melting fast that year, washing away dirt that had covered things for decades. That's when we started finding the bones. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the mountain first. Spruce Knob isn't like other places. It's the highest point in West Virginia, and up there, the air feels different. Thinner, like it's holding its breath. The Cherokee buried their dead on that mountain for hundreds of years. Then came the Civil War, and soldiers died there too. Later, mining accidents killed dozens more. The mountain has seen a lot of death. I always felt responsible for those old burial sites. Part of my job was making sure nobody disturbed them. Grave robbers, treasure hunters, kids looking for thrills. They all wanted to dig where they shouldn't. I stopped them when I could. That March morning, I got a call from 2 hikers. They'd found something strange near the old Cherokee burial ground. Something that didn't belong. "It's bones," the woman said over the radio, her voice shaky. "But they're arranged, like someone built something with them." I drove up the mountain road, my truck bouncing over potholes left by the winter freeze. The fog was thick that day, rolling between the trees like smoke. When I got to the burial site, I could see what the hikers meant. Someone had taken old bones, arm bones, leg bones, pieces of ribs, and built them into a perfect circle. Each bone pointed inward toward a skull sitting in the center. The skull was old, really old, with teeth worn down by centuries. "Did you touch anything?" I asked the hikers. They shook their heads. The man pointed at the bone circle. "We came up here yesterday to take photos. This wasn't here then. Someone built it overnight." I knelt down next to the arrangement. The bones were definitely Cherokee. I could tell by the shape of the skull, the way the joints had worn. But they should have been buried 6 feet underground in a sacred site I'd marked off limits years ago. "Probably just some kids messing around," I told the hikers. But I didn't believe it myself. Kids would have scattered the bones around, not arranged them in perfect geometric patterns. And how did they know exactly where to dig? After the hikers left, I took photos and measurements. The bone circle was exactly 6 feet across. Each bone was placed with mathematical precision. Someone with real knowledge had done this. I called my supervisor and the state archaeology team. They'd need to investigate, maybe bring in the tribal council. Disturbing Cherokee burial sites was a serious crime. But as I packed up my equipment, something bothered me. The bones looked clean, like they'd been polished, and the ground around the circle was perfectly smooth, as if it had been pressed flat by invisible hands. The fog grew thicker as I walked back to my truck. In the mist, the trees looked like giant fingers reaching up from the earth. For just a moment, I thought I saw a movement near the bone circle, a shadow that didn't match any tree. When I turned around, the bones were still there, arranged in their perfect pattern. But now, the skull in the center was facing me, its empty eye sockets staring right at my face. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks. Bones don't move by the suiti themselves. That's what I believed then. That's what I had to believe. Because if bones could move on their own, everything I knew about death was wrong. The next morning, I found 3 more bone circles. I drove up before dawn, wanting to secure the site before the archaeology team arrived. But when I got to the burial ground, I stopped dead in my tracks. 3 new circles sat next to the first one, all perfectly arranged, all using bones that should have been buried deep underground. The skulls in each circle faced different directions: north, south, east, and west. I radioed for backup and called Dr. Sarah Chen, the state archaeologist. She arrived 2 hours later with her grad student, Tommy. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen said, photographing the bone arrangements. "These remains should be in the protected burial site. Someone would need heavy equipment to dig them up." But there were no tool marks in the dirt, no tire tracks from machinery, no footprints except mine and the hikers from yesterday. Tommy knelt beside one of the circles. "Professor, look at this." He pointed to markings carved into the arm bones, symbols I didn't recognize, but they looked old, really old. "Cherokee?" I asked. Dr. Chen shook her head. "These marks are older, pre-Columbian, maybe older than that." We spent the day documenting everything. The bones were clean and perfectly preserved, like they'd been protected from weather for centuries. The arrangements were so precise, they looked like engineering blueprints. As the sun went down, we packed up our equipment. Dr. Chen would return tomorrow with more tools and a bigger team. We locked the site and posted warning signs. But I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. That night, I stayed in my cabin on the mountain. I lived there during the work season, close enough to respond to emergencies quickly. Around midnight, my radio crackled to life. Static filled the air, broken by a sound I'd never heard before. A rhythmic clicking, like stones tapping together. The clicking came in patterns, almost like code. I tried to respond, but my radio was dead. The clicking continued for 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those empty skull sockets staring at me. The next morning, Dr. Chen called in a panic. "Maria, you need to get up here now. Something's happened." I drove to the burial site expecting vandalism or theft. Instead, I found something much worse. The bone circles had multiplied. Now there were 12 of them, arranged in a larger pattern that covered half an acre. Each circle was perfect. Each skull faced a specific direction. And in the center of the large pattern sat something that made my blood freeze. A bone sculpture 10 feet tall, built from hundreds of human remains. Arms and legs wove together to form walls. Ribs created arches and doorways. Skulls crowned the top like decorations on a cathedral. The sculpture was beautiful and horrible at the same time. It looked like it had taken years to build, but it had appeared overnight. "Call the FBI," Dr. Chen whispered. "This is beyond grave robbing. Someone's been collecting bodies for decades." But I was thinking about something else. The symbols carved into the bones looked fresh, like they'd been made recently. And the bone sculpture wasn't just random. It had rooms and passages, like it was meant for something to live inside. Tommy walked around the sculpture, taking photos. "Professor, you need to see this." He pointed to the ground around the bone building. The dirt was disturbed, but not from above. The earth bulged upward in long lines, like something had pushed up from underneath. "Mole tunnels," Dr. Chen suggested. But moles don't make tunnels 6 feet wide. As we documented the new bone arrangements, I noticed something else. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind had stopped blowing. The only so, and was that soft clicking noise coming from somewhere inside the bone sculpture. Dr. Chen heard it too. "What is that?" Before I could answer, one of the skulls on top of the sculpture turned to look at us. Its jaw opened and closed, making the clicking sound. Tommy screamed and ran. Dr. Chen dropped her camera. I stood frozen as more skulls began turning, all looking down at us with their empty sockets. The clicking grew louder, like dozens of voices trying to communicate. Then the sculpture began to shake. Bones shifted and moved, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The walls grew taller, new rooms formed. Something was building with those bones, something that used human remains like construction materials, and it was still hungry for more. Dr. Chen wanted to call in the National Guard, but I convinced her to give me one more day. If we brought in the military, they'd destroy the site. I needed to understand what we were dealing with first. That was my first big mistake. I spent that night reading everything I could find about the mountain's history. The Cherokee had stories about bone spirits, guardians who protected the dead from disrespect. But these stories were different from what I was seeing. The old tales talked about spirits who moved bones to proper resting places. They didn't build with them. Around 3 a.m., I heard scratching sounds outside my cabin. I looked out the window and saw something that made me grab my shotgun. Skeletal hands were pushing up through the dirt in my yard, not attached to bodies, just hands, crawling like spiders across the ground. They gathered sticks and stones, arranging them in the same geometric patterns I'd seen at the burial site. I stepped outside, weapon ready. "Who's there?" The hands stopped moving. In the moonlight, I could see bones scattered across my yard, not just from humans, but from deer, bears, and other animals, all arranged in perfect circles and patterns. One of the skeletal hands pointed toward the mountain, then crumbled to dust. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen and told her no, but to come back. I was going to investigate alone. "That's suicide, Maria. We need help." But I knew no one would believe what we'd seen. And if word got out, we'd have reporters and paranormal investigators swarming the mountain. The Cherokee burial sites would be destroyed by curiosity seekers. I drove up to the bone sculpture with a backpack full of supplies, cameras, recording equipment, and my grandfather's old hunting rifle. He'd taught me to shoot when I was 12 on this same mountain. The sculpture had grown again overnight. Now it was 20 feet tall and covered twice as much ground. New rooms had been added, connected by archways made from curved ribs. The whole thing looked like a cathedral built from human remains. But the strangest part was how organized it looked. This wasn't random construction. Someone had planned every detail. The bones fit together perfectly, creating a structure that was both beautiful and terrifying. I walked around the outside, taking photos. Up close, I could see that the bones came from different time periods. Some were ancient Cherokee remains, darkened by centuries in the earth. Others looked newer, Civil War soldiers, mining accident victims, maybe even recent deaths. How many bodies had been robbed to build this thing? As I circled the sculpture, I found an opening that looked like a doorway. Arm bones formed the frame, topped by a lintel made from a long thigh bone. Beyond the opening, I could see passages leading deeper into the structure. I should have left then. Called for backup, sealed off the area, waited for experts to figure out what to do. Instead, I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The bone walls glowed softly in the flashlight beam, polished, smooth as marble. The passages branched off in several directions like a maze. Skulls were embedded in the walls at regular intervals, their eye sockets dark, as caves. I followed the main passage deeper into the structure. The walls here were made from smaller bones, fingers, toes, pieces of spine. Everything fit together without gaps or mortar, held in place by some force I couldn't understand. The passage opened into a large room with a domed ceiling made from interwoven ribs. In the center of the room sat something that made me stumble backward, a throne made entirely from human skulls. Hundreds of them, stacked and arranged to create a seat fit for a king. At the base of the throne, arm bones spelled out words in a language I didn't recognize. But I could feel what the words meant. "Those who disturb the dead will join them." I raised my camera to take a photo, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, rifle ready. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and thin, wearing clothes from another century. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. In the strange light of the bone walls, I could see right through him. "You should not be here," he said. His voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of Captain Joshua Webb, 23rd Virginia Infantry. I died on this mountain in 1863. The ghost moved closer, and I could see the bullet hole in his uniform jacket. We all died here, one way or another. We? He gestured toward the walls, and I realized what I was seeing. The bones weren't random remains. They were people. Individuals who had lived and died on this mountain over the centuries. The Cherokee, the soldiers, the miners, the hikers who never made it home, Captain Webb continued. All of us rest here now, together. The bone collectors make sure we're not forgotten. Bone collectors? But he was already fading away. They're coming, he whispered. They've been building something special, and they need one more to complete it. The throne of skulls began to glow, and I heard that clicking sound again, louder now, coming from all around me. The walls themselves were making the noise, as if the bones were trying to speak. I ran toward the exit, but the passages had changed. Walls had shifted, creating new routes and dead ends. The bone structure was alive, rearranging itself to trap me inside. Behind me, I heard new sounds. The scraping of bone against bone, the whisper of skeletal feet across stone floors. The bone collectors were coming, and they wanted me to stay. Forever. I ran through the shifting bone maze for what felt like hours. Every time I thought I'd found the exit, the walls would move again, blocking my path with new arrangements of ribs and arm bones. The clicking sounds followed me, getting closer. Sometimes I caught glimpses of my pursuers in my flashlight beam, skeletal figures that moved with purpose, carrying fresh bones to add to the growing structure. Finally, I found myself in a dead end. The walls towered above me, made from leg bones and spines. At the top, dozens of skulls looked down with their empty sockets. I was trapped. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Maria, is that you?" I spun around. An old woman stood behind me, translucent like Captain Webb had been. But I recognized her face immediately. Grandma Rosa? My grandmother smiled the same warm smile I remembered from childhood. She'd died 5 years ago and was buried in the town cemetery 30 miles away. What was she doing here? "I've been waiting for you, honey. We all have. Grandma, you need to help me get out of here. There are things in this place, moving bones around, building with them." She shook her head sadly. "You don't understand yet. We are the ones building. All of us who died on this mountain, we're the bone collectors." The truth hit me like a physical blow. "No, you're buried in town. I was at your funeral. My bones are here now, child. They brought me here because this is where I belong. This is where all the mountain's dead belong together." Around us, more figures began to appear, Cherokee warriors from centuries past, Civil War soldiers in blue and gray uniforms, miners covered in coal dust, hikers in modern clothing who'd gotten lost and never found their way home. All of them ghosts. All of them part of the bone collectors. "Every death on this mountain creates one of us," Grandma Rosa explained. "We gather the bones of the dead and build with them. It's our purpose now." "But why? What are you building?" "A place where the dead can rest properly, where every soul who died here is remembered and honored." She gestured to the bone walls around us. "Look closer, Maria. See what we've really made." I looked at the walls with new eyes. The bones weren't just construction materials. They were arranged in patterns that told stories. Cherokee symbols mixed with Civil War regimental numbers. Mining equipment carved from finger bones. Modern hiking gear made from ribs. Each section of wall represented someone's life and death on the mountain. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "And nearly complete," said another voice. I turned to see a new figure, a Native American man in traditional dress. His face was painted for war, and a tomahawk hung from his belt. "I am Chief Standing Bear. My people have guarded this mountain for 800 years. In life, we protected the living. In death, we protect the dead." He moved closer, and I could see through his translucent form to the bone walls behind him. "But our work is not finished. The Bone Cathedral needs one final addition, a guardian for the living world, someone who can bridge the gap between the dead and those who still breathe. I backed against the wall, feeling the smooth bone surface against my shoulders. You want me to die? We want you to choose, Grandma Rosa said. Stay with us and help protect the mountain's dead. Become the guardian who makes sure no one disturbs our rest. Or leave, Chief Standing Bear added. But know that others will come, archaeologists, treasure hunters, developers who want to build on our sacred ground. Without a living guardian, our bones will be scattered and our stories lost. The clicking sounds grew louder, and I realized they weren't random. The bone collectors were speaking to each other in a language made from the tapping of bone on bone. What are they saying? I asked. They're voting. Captain Webb's voice came from somewhere in the walls. Deciding whether you're worthy to be our guardian. The clicking stopped. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the bone walls. Then Chief Standing Bear nodded. You have been chosen. Your respect for the dead, your years protecting our burial sites. These things matter to us. He reached out his ghostly hand. Take my hand and cross over. Join us in death and help us guard the mountain forever. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at my grandmother's hopeful face. Part of me wanted to take it. These people had suffered and died, and their remains had been scattered or forgotten. What they'd built here was a monument to every life lost on the mountain. But another part of me thought about the living world I'd leave behind. My job protecting the forest. The hikers and campers who needed someone to keep them safe. There has to be another way, I said. Chief Standing Bear lowered his hand. Perhaps, but it will require sacrifice from both the living and the dead. I made a deal with the bone collectors that night. Instead of dying and joining them, I would become their guardian in the living world. I would protect their bone cathedral from disturbance, make sure the burial sites stayed sacred, and help lost souls find their way to rest. In return, they would stop growing their structure and would only collect bones that were already disturbed or improperly buried. But know this, Chief Standing Bear warned as the agreement was made. You are bound to this mountain now. As long as you serve as guardian, you cannot leave for more than 3 days at a time. And when you eventually die, whether from old age or accident, you will join us here. I accepted. The Bone Cathedral became invisible to most people after that. Hikers might catch a glimpse of white walls between the trees, but when they looked directly, they'd see only rocks and branches. The bone collectors had ways of hiding their work. Dr. Chen and Tommy never saw the structure again. They found only the original bone circles, which I convinced them were probably arranged by local teenagers playing pranks. The investigation was quietly closed. But I see the cathedral every day. It stands in the forest like a monument to everyone who ever died on the mountain. Sometimes I visit with the ghosts inside, listening to their stories and helping them arrange new bones that wash up after spring floods or winter storms. My grandmother is always happy to see me. She shows me new sections of the cathedral, rooms built from the bones of deer and birds and other mountain creatures. Even in death, she's still teaching me about respect for all living things. The living world thinks I'm just a dedicated park ranger who's gotten a little strange over the years. I file my reports, guide tour groups, and keep people away from sensitive areas. But at night, I help the bone collectors with their work. Last week, a hiker fell off a cliff during a storm. His body was never found by the search teams, but I knew where he'd gone. The bone collectors had welcomed him home. I carved his name into the stone marker I keep outside my cabin, a list of everyone the mountain has claimed. It's getting longer each year. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I die. Will someone else take over as guardian, or will the bone collectors have to find a new way to protect their dead? I guess I'll find out eventually. But until then, I have work to do. The mountain remembers every soul that died here, and so do I. It's my job to make sure they're never forgotten. If you ever visit Spruce Knob, be respectful. Watch where you walk. Don't disturb anything that looks old or important. The dead are always watching, and they have very long memories. Author's note: This story is based on reports from Park Ranger Maria Thornfield, who has served in Monongahela National Forest for over 40 years. She still lives in a cabin on Spruce Knob and maintains the forest's burial site protection program. The Bone Cathedral has never been photographed, though several hikers have reported seeing strange white structures in the forest that disappear when approached directly. My name is David Moonwhisper, and I've been a park ranger at Cherokee National Forest for 15 years. People always ask about my last name. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to say our family could hear the moon's secrets. I thought it was just pretty talk until August of 1972. I worked the night shift at Roan Mountain State Park in Tennessee. Most folks don't know we have rangers who work all night, but someone has to watch over the campers and hikers who think the mountains are safe after dark. The mountains are never safe after dark. My job is special because I run the astronomy programs. Roan Mountain sits high up, away from city lights, making it perfect for watching stars. During the Perseid meteor shower in August, we get visitors from all over who want to see shooting stars rain down from the sky. That's when it happened. I'm 40 years old, and I've seen every shadow on this mountain. I know which trees cast long fingers across the trails, which rocks make weird shapes in moonlight, and which caves echo sounds back at you. After 15 years of walking these paths with just a flashlight, you learn every corner of your territory. The Cherokee people say this mountain is sacred. My grandmother told me stories about dancers who performed ceremonies here hundreds of years ago. She said the spirits never really left. They just learned to hide better. Cherokee ghost stories were cultural metaphors, I always figured, just ways to teach respect for the old ways. Until shadows started dancing without bodies. It was August 15th, 1972. New moon meant perfect darkness for the meteor shower. I had 12 people signed up for the midnight astronomy program. Families with kids, some college students, an older couple from Georgia. Everyone was excited because the weather was perfect. Clear skies, no wind, temperature just cool enough to make you want to stand close. See to other people. I set up the big telescope on the high plateau, the same spot where Cherokee dancers used to perform ceremonies before the government took their land. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now we brought white folks up here to look at stars where my ancestors once looked to the spirits. Okay, everyone, I called to the group. The Perseid meteors come from the constellation Perseus, right over there. I pointed northeast. We should see one shooting star every minute or so. Some might leave trails that glow for several seconds. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, why are there people dancing over there? I looked where she was pointing. Nothing but empty ground between two big oak trees. Where, honey? Her mother asked. Right there. The shadow people. They're spinning in a circle. I walked over to the spot. My flashlight showed only pine needles and old leaves. No dancers, no people. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the night bugs had stopped making noise. Just tricks from the starlight, I told the little girl. But I kept my flashlight pointed at that spot for the rest of the night. We saw plenty of meteors, beautiful streaks of light burning up in the atmosphere, just like I'd explained dozens of times before. But twice I caught myself looking away from the sky to check that empty space between the oak trees. And twice, just for a second, I thought I saw something moving. The group left happy around 2 a.m. I stayed behind to pack up the telescope. That's when I heard it. A soft drumming sound, like heartbeats echoing off the mountain. And underneath the drumming, voices singing in words I almost recognized. Cherokee words. My grandmother's language floating through air that should have been silent. I grabbed the telescope and headed back to the ranger station faster than I should have walked on a dark mountain trail. But every few steps I had to stop and look behind me, because I swear I could feel eyes watching from the shadows between the trees. At the station I wrote in my log, astronomy program completed successfully, 12 participants, clear weather, good meteor visibility. I didn't write about the little girl's question or the drumming or the feeling that something had followed me down the mountain. Some things don't belong in official reports. 3 nights later, I got my first radio call about the shadow dancers. "Ranger Station, this is Campsite 7, came a shaky voice through the static. "We need someone up here right away." I grabbed my radio and emergency kit. "This is Ranger Moon Whisper. What's your emergency?" "There are people dancing around our tent, in the dark, but we can't see who they are." I drove the parked truck up the winding mountain road to Campsite 7. The Henderson family from North Carolina. Mom, Dad, 2 teenage boys. They'd been camping in our park for 3 years straight, never caused any trouble. Mrs. Henderson met me at their picnic table. She was wrapped in a blanket even though the night was warm. "It started about an hour ago," she said. "We were sitting by the fire when we heard singing. Beautiful singing, like a church choir. Then we saw the shadows." "What kind of shadows?" "People shadows, moving in a circle around our tent. Dancing shadows, but no people making them." Mr. Henderson pointed to the ground around their orange dome tent. "Look at this." I shined my flashlight down. The grass was pressed flat in a perfect circle around the tent, like many feet had danced there over and over. But there were no footprints, no shoe marks, just the bent grass showing where dancers had moved. "Did you see the people casting these shadows?" I asked. "That's the thing," said one of the teenage boys. "The shadows moved like they were dancing to music, but there was nobody there. Just the shadows on the ground and on our tent walls." I walked the circle slowly, looking for any sign of who might have done that. Pranksters from another campsite, maybe. But the nearest other campers were half a mile away, and this dance circle was too perfect, too precise. "The singing stopped when we yelled," Mrs. Henderson added, "but the shadows kept dancing for another few minutes. Then they just faded away." I helped them move their tent to a different spot and told them to radio me if anything else happened. But I didn't leave. I parked my truck where I could watch Campsite 7 and waited. At 2:47 a.m., it started again. First, the singing. Multiple voices harmonizing in Cherokee. Words I remembered from my grandmother's bedtime songs. Then the shadows appeared. Not cast by trees or rocks or clouds over the moon. These shadows had human shapes, moving in the slow, rhythmic steps of traditional Cherokee dancing. I counted 7 shadow figures holding hands in a circle. They moved clockwise around the empty campsite where the Hendersons had been. The shadows were dark against the pale ground, clear as if cast by bright light, but there was no light source, only the dim stars above. I grabbed my camera and tried to take pictures. The flash went off, but when I looked at the photos later, they showed only empty ground. Yet I could still see the shadow dancers moving right in front of me. One shadow broke from the circle and moved toward my truck. I watched my own shadow on the dashboard, cast by the dome light, lean forward like it was trying to get out and join the dance. I turned off the dome light fast. The shadow dancers continued their ceremony for exactly 20 minutes. Then they faded away like smoke, leaving only the pressed-down grass in a perfect circle. I sat in my truck until sunrise, writing notes and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Cherokee spirits, my grandmother would have said. Ancestors keeping the old ways alive. But I was a park ranger, trained in first aid, and fire prevention and wildlife management. I dealt with facts, not ghost stories. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was some kind of optical illusion, temperature inversions. Could create weird light effects. The meteor shower might have left atmospheric disturbances. There had to be a scientific explanation. Then I found the second circle. This one was at the astronomy program site, pressed into the ground exactly where I'd set up the telescope 3 nights earlier. Same perfect circle, same bent grass with no footprints. But this circle was bigger, like more dancers had joined the ceremony, and in the center of the circle, someone had arranged small stones in the shape of a crescent moon. Nobody knew that my Cherokee name, given to me by my grandmother, meant one who listens to the moon's whispers. Nobody except family, and they were all either dead or lived hundreds of miles away. I picked up one of the stones. It was still warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight instead of mountain darkness. That's when I knew this wasn't about temperature inversions or atmospheric disturbances. The mountain was waking up. I started staying later after my shifts, watching the places where the shadow dancers appeared. 3 more families reported seeing dancing shadows around their campsites. A group of college hikers found a stone circle arrangement on the trail to Rowan High Bluff. The park's wildlife cameras kept malfunctioning, but only at night, and only in areas where the dances happened. My supervisor, Ranger Collins, thought I was getting too involved in what he called camper pranks. "Dave, you're filing too many weird reports," he said during our weekly meeting. "Dancing shadows, stone circles. Come on, it's probably just kids from town messing with the tourists." "Kids didn't make these grass circles," I said. "And kids don't sing in Cherokee." "Cherokee? How do you even know it's Cherokee? You speak the language now." I wanted to tell him about my grandmother, about the songs she sang to me when I was small, about how my blood recognized the voices even when my mind couldn't translate the words. But Collins wouldn't understand. To him, I was just another ranger who'd been on night duty too long. "Just keep the campers safe and stop chasing ghosts," he said. But the shadow dancers were getting bolder. On August 23rd, they appeared during my astronomy program. 8 visitors had come to see the moon through the telescope. It was 3/4 full and perfect for looking at craters. We were set up on the high plateau when the singing started. This time, everyone heard it. "What's that music?" asked Dr. Martinez, a professor from Knoxville who came to our programs every few months. "Sounds like Native American chanting," said his wife. The singing grew louder, coming from all around us like we were surrounded by a huge choir. Then the shadows appeared at the edge of our circle of telescope observers. 7 shadow figures, then 12, then 20, all moving in the same slow dance pattern. "Oh my God," whispered a teenage girl. "Look at the ground." Our shadows cast by my flashlight and the bright moon were moving wrong. Instead of copying our movements, our shadows swayed and stepped in rhythm with the shadow dancers. It was like our shadows wanted to join the ceremony, but our bodies were holding them back. "Everyone stay calm," I said, but my own voice was shaking. "Just watch. Don't move toward them." The shadow dancers circled our group 3 times, their movements becoming more complex. Some shadows split off to dance in pairs. Others leaped and spun in moves that would have been impossible for living people, and our shadows kept trying to break away from our feet to join them. Dr. Martinez was filming with his new video camera. "This is incredible," he kept saying. "This is absolutely incredible." The ceremony lasted until the moon set behind the western ridge. As soon as the moonlight faded, the shadow dancers vanished. Our own shadows returned to normal. The singing stopped. "Did everyone see that?" I asked. 8 people nodded. 8 witnesses to something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Martinez played back his video footage. The camera had recorded everything. Our group standing by the telescope, the moonlight on the ground, even our voices talking. But where the shadow dancers had been, the video showed only empty space. "The camera doesn't see them," Dr. Martinez said, amazed. "But they're definitely real. Look at this." He showed me the grass where the shadow dancers had performed, pressed down in intricate patterns that spelled out Cherokee symbols. Symbols I recognized from my grandmother's old beadwork. The symbols meant, "Welcome home." That night I drove to my grandmother's grave in the Cherokee Cemetery 40 miles south. I hadn't visited in 2 years, not since my mother died. But I needed to ask her about the shadow dancers, even if she couldn't answer. Her headstone read, "Mary Moonwhisper. She kept the old ways alive." I sat in the grass and told her about everything. The dancing shadows, the stone circles, the Cherokee singing, the way our shadows tried to join their ceremony. I told her I was scared, but also curious. Part of me wanted to understand what the shadow dancers wanted. The wind picked up while I talked, making the pine trees whisper above her grave. And in that whispering, I heard her voice again, speaking the Cherokee words she'd taught me as a child. "They're calling you home, little moon. Your people need you to remember." I drove back to Roan Mountain knowing that my grandmother had been right all along. The spirits never left. They just waited for someone with Cherokee blood to come back and listen to their whispers. But listening and answering are two different things, and I was about to learn the difference could cost me everything. On August 28th, the shadow dancers came for me. I was alone on the plateau, checking the telescope mount before the next night's program. The moon was almost new again, just a thin crescent hanging low in the west. Perfect conditions for the shadow dancers, but I thought I was safe because no ceremonies had ever happened without an audience. I was wrong. The singing started softly, like wind through leaves, then louder until I could make out individual voices, men and women singing in harmony, children adding high sweet notes, elders keeping the rhythm with deeper tones. A whole community of voices that had been silent for generations. The shadow dancers rose from the ground around me, not appearing from somewhere else, actually rising up from the earth like they'd been sleeping just beneath the surface. Dozens of them, more than I'd ever seen before. They formed 3 circles. I stood in the center. The inner circle was 7 shadow figures holding hands, moving in the basic dance steps my grandmother had tried to teach me when I was young. The second circle was 12 dancers performing more complex movements, leaping, spinning, weaving between each other in patterns that told stories. The outer circle was 20 or more shadow figures moving in what I recognized as a war dance, fierce and powerful and protective. And in the center, my own shadow began to move, not copying my movements, moving on its own, like it had finally broken free from my body. I looked down and watched my shadow dance the steps I'd never learned, performing ceremonies I'd only heard about in my grandmother's stories. "Little moon," a voice said inside my head, not heard through my ears, but spoken directly into my thoughts. "You have Cherokee blood. You can hear the old songs. Will you dance with your people?" I tried to answer out loud, but my voice wouldn't work. The shadow dancers were pulling something from me. Not my body, but something deeper. Something that lived in my blood and bones and memories. "We are your ancestors," the voice continued. "We'd danced here when this mountain was young, when the Cherokee Nation was strong, when our ceremonies kept the world in balance. But the white men came. They took our land. They forbid our dances. They made our children forget the old ways." My shadow was dancing faster now, performing moves that made my actual body feel tired, even though I stood perfectly still. We became shadows to survive. We hid in darkness so our ceremonies would not die. For generations, we waited for someone with Cherokee blood to come back to this sacred place. Someone who could learn the old ways and teach them to the living world again. I understood now why the little girl had seen them first, why all the witnesses were families with children. The shadow dancers appeared to people who still believed in magic, who hadn't lost the ability to see beyond the ordinary world. But if I join you, I managed to think, what happens to my body? What happens to my life? "Bodies age and die," the voice said sadly. "Shadows are eternal. You could preserve our culture forever. You could ensure the ceremonies never end." My shadow was leading the inner circle now, teaching the other shadow dancers moves they seemed to have forgotten, and with every step my shadow took, my body felt lighter, less solid, like I was fading away. I thought about my life, 15 years of night shifts, astronomy programs for tourists, filing reports nobody believed. What did I really have in the living world that was worth more than eternal connection to my ancestors? But then I thought about Dr. Martinez's video camera, about the families who'd witnessed the shadow dancers, about the Cherokee people still living who'd lost touch with their traditional ceremonies. What if the shadow dancers didn't need me to disappear? What if they needed me to stay alive and serve as a bridge between their world and ours? "There's another way," I said, finding my voice again. "I can learn your ceremonies and teach them to living Cherokee people. I can help you connect with the world again without hiding in shadows." The sing stopped. All the shadow figures turned toward me, and I felt the weight of generations looking through my soul. "You would do this?" the voice asked. You would carry our dances back to the living world, even knowing that most people will think you're crazy? My grandmother always said the old ways needed to be kept alive, I said. Maybe that's why you called me here. Not to disappear into shadows, but to bring the shadows back into the light. My shadow rejoined my body with a sensation like coming home after years away. The shadow dancers began to fade, but slowly, peacefully, like they were satisfied with our agreement. Then we will teach you, little moon, the voice said. Learn well, remember everything, and help our people remember who they are. The last thing I heard was my grandmother's laughter, carried on the wind like a blessing. I woke up at sunrise, lying in the grass at the center of 3 perfect circles pressed into the plateau. My clothes were soaked with dew, but I felt more rested than I had in years. Like I'd been sleeping peacefully instead of negotiating with the spirits of my ancestors. In my pocket, I found a small piece of paper covered with Cherokee symbols written in my own handwriting. Instructions for the shadow dance ceremony. Steps I'd never learned with my conscious mind, but somehow my hand had recorded them perfectly. I drove back to the ranger station and called in sick for the first time in 5 years. Then I spent the day researching Cherokee cultural centers and tribal councils. If I was going to teach the shadow dances to living people, I needed to find the right people to learn them. Dr. Martinez called that afternoon. Dave, I've been thinking about what we saw up there. That video footage is remarkable. The audio picked up the singing even though the camera couldn't see the dancers. Would you be willing to present this? This to the Cherokee Studies Department at the university? Actually, I said, I think I can do better than that. It took 6 months to organize, but the first shadow dance ceremony, performed by living people in over a century, happened on Rowan Mountain in February 1973. 23 Cherokee descendants came from across the southeast. I taught them the steps I'd learned from the shadow dancers, and we performed the ceremony under a full moon. The shadow dancers appeared to watch, not to perform themselves, but to observe, to approve, to pass their traditions to the next generation of living dancers. Some of the participants felt the presence of the ancestral spirits. Others just enjoyed learning the traditional dances. But everyone agreed the ceremony felt important, like we were healing something that had been broken for too long. I still work nights at Roan Mountain State Park. I still run astronomy programs for visitors who want to see the stars. But now I also lead Cherokee cultural programs, teaching traditional dances to anyone who wants to learn them. The shadow dancers still appear sometimes, mostly to children who believe in magic, or to Cherokee people who are searching for their cultural roots. They don't hide as much as they used to. They don't need to. Because some traditions are kept alive by those who died to preserve them, but the best way to honor those spirits is to bring their gifts back to the living world. My grandmother was right. Our family really could hear the moon's whispers. And sometimes, if you listen carefully enough, the moon tells you exactly what your people need you to do. Even if it takes 15 years of night shifts to finally hear the message clearly. The shadow dancers of Roan Mountain are still dancing, but now they're teaching living feet to remember the steps that connect us to who we used to be and who we can be again. If you ever visit Cherokee National Forest on a clear night when the moon is dark, listen for the singing. Look for shadows that move without bodies casting them. And if you have Cherokee, a blood flowing in your veins, don't be surprised if your own shadow starts to dance. The ancestors are always calling their children home. It's just a matter of whether we're ready to answer.